They often say, the truth is a weapon, but here in the city of Milan, the truth is a death sentence. I am Lyra. Or if you have ever wandered through the darkest corners of the internet, you might know me by the name Nocturne. I have spent my entire life running from shadows, only to realize that the darkness isn't something that chases you. It is something that dwells deep within your veins. The work you are about to hear is no fairy tale of princes and princesses. This is a scar turned into words. This is the scream of a woman who looked straight into the eyes of the devil and realized that even the devil knows how to bleed. You will hear of Dante Valesco, a man carved from marble and agony, the one who picked me up from the gutter of humiliation, called me trash, and threw me into an opulent hell. In this audio, I will lead you into the kingdom of ghosts, a place where the scent of sandalwood clings to the smell of gunpowder, a place where a kiss can burn hotter than fire, yet feel as cold as a blade driven through the heart. Do not hope for salvation. Prepare yourselves to see your own reflection in our shattered mirror, because when night falls, the most terrifying thing is not the monster. It is the realization of just how much you crave to belong to that darkness. Darkness is not what is frightening. What is truly terrifying is when you begin to find it seductive. If you were Lyra, would you choose to flee and keep your freedom, or accept a soul contract with the devil Dante to taste his power? Leave your thoughts on the Uncrowned King of Milan below. The most piercing comments will be featured in the next chapter. I am Nocturne, and this is the first chapter of Hell. Milan in late November appeared like an oil painting blurred by rainwater. The ancient Gothic buildings loomed along narrow streets, but to Lyra Thorne, they felt like stone shackles suffocating her every breath. The distinct Lombardy drizzle carried a bone-chilling cold, lashing against her pale cheeks and turning her lips a sickly shade of violet. Lyra tightened her grip on her frayed wool coat, her only shield against the Italian winter. The leather boots she had bought from a second-hand shop in London were now worn thin, thumping a heavy, waterlogged beat against the slippery cobblestones. Every step was a struggle. In her coat pocket, her frost-bitten fingers clutched a single €10 note, crumpled and damp, much like her own fate. Beside it lay the eviction notice for her squalid attic apartment, served to her only this morning. Go or sleep on the streets, the landlord's gravelly, crude voice still echoed in her mind. Lyra halted, her shallow breath vanishing into the air like thin smoke. She looked up at a crimson neon sign hanging above a grand entrance. Inferno. The name appeared like an invitation to hell, but for someone with no path of retreat, hell was a home. Inferno was not merely the most expensive nightclub in Milan. It was a kingdom of secrets, where tycoons and Mafia dons brokered deals that shifted the fate of nations. She glanced down at the recruitment flyer taped to the corner of the door. Dancers wanted, high income, no experience required, only beauty. Lyra closed her eyes, a wave of nausea rising in her throat. She had never imagined she would have to stand under stage lights, exposing her body to hungry gazes. She was a woman of words, an anonymous weaver of dark dreams for others. But words could not fill a cramping stomach, and they certainly could not protect her from the stepfather who was relentlessly hunting her from London. Just as Lyra prepared to step into the staff entrance, a sound tore through the curtain of rain. The roar of a V12 engine from a midnight black Rolls-Royce boat tail made the ground vibrate beneath her feet. The car glided like a phantom of power, slowly coming to a halt at the VIP red carpet. In an instant, A team of bodyguards in black suits and earpieces stepped out, forming 2 rows of a living barricade, separating the chaos of the city from the stillness of authority. The air around them seemed to be sucked dry. The presence of that car was like a magnet attracting both fear and worship. Lyra recoiled, her legs trembling from exhaustion and cold. But the slick stone floor betrayed her. Her worn heel slipped on a patch of standing water. Thud. Instead of falling onto the cold ground, she collided with a body as hard as bedrock. The impact was so forceful it squeezed the air from her lungs. The intoxicating scent of sandalwood mingled with expensive tobacco, and a hint of metallic coldness flooded her senses. It was the scent of ultimate wealth, of things that could never be bought with mere pocket change. Lyra looked up in a panic, and her breath completely froze. The man standing before her was nearly 6'3", towering like a god from Greek mythology, yet possessing the aura of a demon from the deepest abyss. Dante Valesco. The charcoal grey 3-piece suit he wore was undoubtedly a masterpiece tailored by the finest artisans of Savile Row, hugging his broad shoulders and powerful frame. His face was a work of cruel art, a sharp, angular jawline, a high, straight bridge of the nose, and thin lips pressed into a line of utter disdain. But what terrified Lyra most were his eyes. They were the colour of ash, so pale they were almost translucent, yet they contained a frigidity that could freeze the blood in one's veins. Dante did not look at her as a woman, or even as a human being. He looked at her as a smudge of dirt that had accidentally fallen onto his polished leather shoes. Dante slowly pulled a white silk pocket square from his jacket. He said nothing, leisurely wiping away the raindrops that had splashed onto his sleeve where Lyra had touched him. Every movement exuded a deadly elegance. Once finished, he nonchalantly let go, allowing the expensive silk square to flutter down into the dirty puddle at Lyra's feet, right beside her tattered boots. "Marco," Dante's voice rose, low and vibrating like a cello, yet carrying the authority of a tyrant. "What am I paying you for? So that this kind of trash can slip through the perimeter and foul the air I breathe?" The word trash left his lips like a stinging slap to Lyra's face. The blood in her veins boiled, humiliation surging to drown out even the cold. She stared at the man before her, the man who held half of Milan's economy in his hands, the man rumoured to be able to make someone vanish from the map with a single snap of his fingers. He made to walk away, but Lyra, in a moment of sheer recklessness and indignation, spoke up. "I am not trash. I am just a passerby who slipped." Dante stopped. He didn't turn around fully, only tilted his head slightly. A faint, humourless smirk appeared at the corner of his mouth. "In my kingdom, those who cannot stand on their own 2 feet are no different from trash. If you want to survive in Milan, learn to crawl before you try to stand before me." Dante walked on, his guards immediately escorting him into Inferno. The gilded doors slammed shut, sealing her away from the opulence within. Lyra stood there in the rain, her hands clenched into fists. She reached down to retrieve her frayed canvas bag. Inside, her old laptop remained intact. It was her most precious possession, her gateway into the world of Nocturne. On the underground literary forums, Nocturne was a legend, someone capable of describing the squalor and beauty of crime with bone-chilling realism. "You want trash, Dante Valesco?" she thought, her eyes flashing with a dark fire. "I will show you what trash can do. I will enter your world, dissect that rotten soul of yours, and lay it bare on the pages for the whole world to see." Lyra walked toward the staff entrance where shadows loomed. She had no idea that on the other side of those doors, in a magnificent VIP suite overlooking the center stage, Dante Valesco stood before a one-way mirror. In his hand was a gold-plated whiskey glass, but his mind was not on the upcoming festivities. His hand still carried the faint warmth from the collision. It had been 3 years since the bloody night that had cost him his fiancée and his faith in humanity. Dante's body had become a soulless biological machine. He felt no desire, no pain, and certainly no stirrings of the heart. But when that girl with the misty green eyes had crashed into him, a jolt of electricity had torn through the paralysis in his chest. The scent of jasmine, pure, simple jasmine, a scent far too humble amidst the forest of expensive perfumes in the club, clung to his senses. Dante watched the security monitor, tracking Lyra's slender silhouette as she stood before the backstage manager. "Marco," Dante called into his radio, his ash-grey eyes fixed on the screen. "Yes, boss?" The girl in the old wool coat at the staff door. "Don't let her vanish. Tonight, I want her to be the opening act." "But boss, she looks like she doesn't know how to dance." "I don't need her to dance." Dante swirled his drink, his eyes gleaming with a terrifying possessiveness. "I want to see how the trash of Milan trembles when she stands beneath my feet." That night, it still rained in Milan. But inside Inferno, a hunt had officially begun. Lyra Thorne had no idea she had just signed a contract with the devil, and Dante Valesco did not know that the girl he deemed trash was the very person who would write the ending to his lonely life. The backstage of Inferno was a labyrinth of suffocating scents, talcum powder, cheap hairspray, and the pungent musk of anxiety. Lyra stood tucked into a shadow, feeling like a sacrificial lamb lost in a den of wolves. Around her, professional dancers with sculpted bodies and shimmering rhinestone-encrusted costumes were busy with their final preparations. They cast sharp, judgmental side-eyes at her, but Lyra didn't care. Her mind was anchored to her laptop, locked securely in a staff locker, and the echoes of Dante's insults that still burned in her ears. "You there! Move it!" A manager named Marco, a man with a jagged scar across his cheek and predatory eyes, marched toward her. He tossed a scrap of black lace and a silk mask, adorned with dark crystals, onto the vanity. "The boss wants you to open the show tonight. Get dressed." Lyra froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Open the show. I told you. I don't know how to dance. I only applied for a janitorial or stagehand position." Marco let out a dry, mirthless chuckle. "In this place, Valesco's whim is law. You don't need to dance. You just need to stand there and exist. The lights and the music will handle the rest." As the fragile silk of the costume brushed against her skin, a cold shiver raced down Lyra's spine. The garment hid almost nothing. It was designed to celebrate curves and accentuate vulnerability. She tied the silk mask behind her head, concealing half of her face, leaving only her misty green eyes visible. Dark pools of melancholic defiance. In the mirror, she no longer recognized herself. She was no longer the pathetic Lyra Thorne. She had become a character in her own twisted novel. The music began to swell, a haunting, melancholic cello melody that echoed through the vast expanse of Inferno. The stage lights abruptly died, leaving only a single, moon-cold spotlight focused on the center of the stage where Lyra stood. Below her, hundreds of hungry eyes converged on her silhouette. But Lyra didn't look at them. She lifted her gaze to the VIP tier, where the hazy one-way glass hid a monster. She knew he was there. She felt those ash-grey eyes stripping her soul bare, even though she couldn't see him. Lyra didn't dance in the traditional sense. She moved slowly, like a soul wandering lost through the underworld. Her hands grazed the air, her steps swaying yet rhythmic, the rhythm of someone standing on the brink of death. Her trembling wasn't an act, it was her reality, and it was precisely that which created a bizarre magnetic pull. A decaying beauty that commanded the entire club into a stunned silence. Behind the one-way glass, Dante Valesco sat motionless in his crocodile skin armchair. The whiskey in his glass had long since vanished, but he didn't care. His gaze was locked onto the small figure on the stage. Under the lights, Lyra's skin glowed like a rare pearl amidst rubble. The silk mask could not hide the indignation and pain radiating from her eyes. "Intriguing," Dante whispered, his voice dissolving into the shadows. He had never seen anyone stand on the stage of Inferno with an expression that looked like they wanted to burn the entire building to the ground. Others sought to entice him, begging for a shard of his attention. But this girl, she was challenging him. She was telling him that even if he could buy her body, he would never touch a single fragment of her soul. When the music faded, Lyra stood silent in the center of the stage, her frantic breathing causing her chest to heave. Before she could retreat into the wings, Marco appeared, whispering harshly into her ear. "The boss wants to see you. Sweet one, now." Lyra's legs shook as she walked down the crimson-carpeted corridor leading to Dante's private quarters. The scent of sandalwood surrounded her once more, signaling the presence of the master of this domain. The door to Suite 1 swung open, revealing a vast space with minimalist yet decadent luxury. Dante stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, his back to her. He had shed his suit jacket, wearing only a white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing intricate dark tattoos winding around his powerful forearms. "Take off the mask," Dante commanded, not deigning to turn around. Lyra reached up, her trembling fingers untying the silk ribbons. "I have done what you requested. Can I take my payment and leave now?" Dante turned. Under the dim, amber lights, he looked even more lethal. He moved toward her with slow, deliberate steps, each one carrying a suffocating pressure. He stopped when the distance between them was mere centimeters. He reached out a large, calloused hand, hooking his thumb under her chin to force her to meet his ash-grey eyes. "Leave for where? To the attic where your landlord has already thrown your belongings into the street? Or back to the 10-euro note in your pocket?" Lyra gasped. "How do you know?" "In Milan, nothing escapes me, especially not a trash item that crashes into me in the middle of the street," Dante smirked, his thumb tracing the line of her lower lip with bruising pressure. "You said you weren't trash, then prove to me you have more value than that." "What do you want from me?" Lyra asked, her voice cracking. Dante leaned down, his hot breath fanning her ear, carrying the flavor of absolute power and possession. "I need a housekeeper with no family, no past, and above all, no emotions. You will live at my estate. By day, you will serve my needs within that house. By night—" He paused, his gaze darkening as it raked over her heaving chest. "By night, you will be in my quarters. You will be the cure for my emptiness." A chill raced down Lyra's spine. "Are you trying to buy me?" "I am giving you the only path to survival, Lyra Thorne." Dante released her chin, turning back to his desk and tossing a thick stack of cash onto the surface. "This is the down payment for your soul. As long as you are by my side, your stepfather will never find you. But in exchange, you belong to me. Every breath, every thought, every scar on your body. All of it belongs to Dante Valesco." Lyra looked at the money, then at the man before her. She knew she was entering a game she was destined to lose. But within her, the soul of a writer stirred. This was no longer just life. This was the greatest chapter she would ever write. She stepped forward, taking the money, her green eyes meeting his grey ones without fear. I accept the contract. But there is one thing you should know, Dante. The devil may own the flesh, but the light will always belong to the one who holds the pen. Dante cocked an eyebrow, a strange spark flickering in his eyes. Fascinating. I will wait to see what your pen can do before my darkness swallows you whole. That night, Lyra did not return to her attic. She sat in the back of a luxurious black car, heading toward Dante's isolated hilltop mansion. In the shadows of the back seat, she secretly opened her laptop. The first lines of a new chapter appeared, blurred by the passing lights of Milan. The wolf has found its prey, but it does not know that the prey carries a venom called the truth. Tonight, the kingdom of Dante Valesco begins to crumble from within. Dante Valesco's estate did not sit within the clamorous heart of Milan. Instead, it reigned in absolute isolation atop a jagged hill on the outskirts, guarded by rows of towering midnight green cypresses and a perimeter of razor-sharp steel fencing. As the Rolls-Royce glided through the heavy bronze gates, Lyra felt a visceral shift in the atmosphere, as if she had crossed an invisible threshold between the world of the living and a dark, eternal realm. The mansion was a monolith of brutalist architecture, massive blocks of raw grey concrete, angular and imposing, radiating a profound sense of power and an even more profound sense of loneliness. Throughout the drive, Dante had not uttered a single syllable. He sat in the velvet shadows of the back seat, his body as motionless as a funerary statue. Yet, the sheer pressure radiating from his presence made the oxygen inside the car feel thin, causing Lyra's chest to constrict with every shallow breath. He did not look at her. His ash-grey gaze was fixed on the darkness beyond the window, where the dying embers of the storm occasionally flickered with weak lightning, illuminating the sharp, cold profile of the Uncrowned King of Milan. "Get out," Dante commanded as the door was swung open by a middle-aged man whose face appeared to be carved from ancient stone. "This is Enzo, the head butler. He will instruct you on your place within these walls." Lyra stepped out, her legs still trembling as her soles touched the frigid marble of the grand hall. Dante did not wait for her. He strode inside, his broad, solitary silhouette quickly swallowed by the shadows of the seemingly endless corridors. Enzo looked at Lyra. His gaze lacked the overt contempt she had seen in Marco's eyes at the club, but it was filled with a quiet, veiled pity, the kind of emotion that often stings more than outright cruelty. "Follow me, Miss Thorne. I will show you to your quarters before your duties commence. In this house, time is a luxury the master never squanders." The interior of the Valesco estate was even more overwhelming and desolate than its exterior. Everything had been stripped down to a harsh, unforgiving minimalism, a world defined only by shades of grey, black and white. Not a single family photograph adorned the walls. Not a single vase of fresh flowers graced the tables. There was an utter absence of any object that carried a warm hue. The marble floors were polished to such a high gloss that they acted as a mirror, reflecting a distorted image of Lyra, a small, pale girl in a fragile silk dress, looking like a solitary ink smudge on a vast, pristine sheet of parchment. "The rules here are simple, yet they are absolute," Enzo stated, his voice echoing in the hollow silence as he led her through the second-floor gallery. "First, you are strictly forbidden from entering the library or the third-floor office unless specifically summoned. Second, you are never to question the guests who arrive under the cover of night, regardless of what you see or hear. And third," he paused before a door of blackened oak, turning to look directly into Lyra's eyes. "When the master is in his private chambers, you enter only when called. Otherwise, no matter what sounds emerge from within, You are to act as if you are deaf. Do you understand?" Lyra nodded, her throat parched. Her room was situated directly adjacent to Dante's bedroom, separated by a thick wall, yet she could still feel the oppressive weight of his presence. The room was small but impeccably furnished, featuring a large window that overlooked the sheer drop of the hillside. As soon as Enzo retreated, Lyra lunged for her laptop. Her fingers flew across the keyboard in a frantic rhythm, her heart hammering with a volatile mixture of exhilaration and terror. He lives in a fortress of concrete where even the sunlight seems afraid to trespass. He surrounds himself with ironclad rules to mask the truth, that he is terrified of his own existence. This house was not built for living. It is a mausoleum for unburied memories, and I am the latest sacrificial offering brought in to appease the lonely monster dwelling within. Lyra's daytime duties began at 6 a.m. She was no mere servant, she was the designated caretaker of Dante's personal requirements. She prepared his black, unsweetened coffee, organized the heavy dossiers on his desk, and ensured that not a single speck of dust dared to settle on the cold sculptures in the hall. Dante treated her like a ghost. He walked past her without a glance, issued commands without using her name, and possessed her at night with a soulless, mechanical familiarity. On the afternoon of the third day, while cleaning the second-floor reading room, Lyra instinctively froze as the sharp sound of shattering ceramic erupted from Dante's office, upstairs. Driven by a writer's insatiable curiosity, she hurried toward the source. The door was not fully latched. Lyra stopped dead at the threshold, her breath hitching in her throat. Dante was slumped on the floor amidst the jagged remains of an antique vase worth tens of thousands of dollars. He was shirtless, wearing only black trousers. Under the late afternoon sun streaming through the gaps in the blinds, the crisscrossing scars on his back were starkly revealed. They were angry, raised, and terrifying. These were no ordinary combat wounds. They were the visceral marks of brutal torture, a blood-soaked history he had carefully hidden beneath layers of bespoke tailoring. But what shattered Lyra's composure was Dante's face. His ash-grey eyes, usually as frigid as ice, were overflowing with a bone-deep agony, and his hands were trembling violently. He was clutching an old gold necklace so tightly in his palm that the ceramic shards on the floor bit into his flesh, blood seeping through his fingers and staining the ground. "Get out! Get the hell out!" Dante roared, his voice hoarse and fractured, like the sound of crystal being ground into dust. Lyra did not move. A strange, sharp sorrow rose within her, far more potent than her fear of death. She was witnessing the absolute fragmentation of a king. "Your hand is bleeding, Dante." He looked up at her, his gaze lethal yet containing a faint, desperate plea at its center. "I told you to vanish. Don't force me to kill you right now." Lyra ignored the threat. She stepped closer, kneeling beside the wreckage, heedless of the sharp shards that threatened to pierce her own skin. She took a handkerchief from her pocket and gently but firmly grasped his bloodied hand. Dante froze. The sudden skin-to-skin contact made him flinch, as if he had been struck by a high-voltage wire. For 3 years, since the day he had lost everything, no one had dared to touch him while he was in this state of raw, naked vulnerability. "Don't touch me with your pity," Dante hissed through clenched teeth. Yet he did not withdraw his hand. His entire frame shivered under her touch. "This isn't pity," Lyra whispered, her green eyes locked onto the abyss within his, refusing to flinch. "This is fairness. You saw me fall in the rain of humiliation in Milan. Now I see you fall in your own darkness. We are both wounded, Dante." Dante stared at her, his breath heavy, mingling the scent of blood and sandalwood. In that singular moment, the mask of the Milanese Mafia lord crumbled entirely. He was merely a man shackled by his past, a severely burned soul desperately seeking a modicum of coolness. He stared at Lyra's small hands as she meticulously bandaged his wound, and a strange, terrifying warmth began to seep into his frozen heart, making the numbness of the last 3 years suddenly throb with pain. "Leave before I change my mind, Lyra," he said, his voice stripped of its usual razor-edged coldness, replaced by an exhaustion so profound it was almost tangible. Lyra stood up, gathered the shards, and quietly exited the room. She returned to her quarters, her breath still coming in short, ragged gasps, her chest heaving. She opened her laptop, but this time the words were not fueled by hatred or cold dissection. Even devils know pain. Beneath the expensive suits and the absolute power lies not a heart of stone, but a pile of ashes still smouldering after a catastrophic fire. He doesn't want to be saved. He simply wants someone to witness his scars without turning away. Tonight, I realize I have committed the hunter's greatest sin. I have begun to feel a soul-deep ache for my prey. That night, Dante did not summon her to his chambers. But as Lyra lay in bed, she heard heavy, measured footsteps in the hallway. The footsteps stopped outside her door for a long, agonizing minute, as if the man outside was battling a demon within himself, before receding back into the shadows. Lyra knew then that the contract had evolved beyond a mere transaction of the flesh. She was penetrating the kingdom of ghosts that Dante Valesco called home, and he was slowly becoming the protagonist in a novel whose ending even she could no longer foresee. The silence within the Valesco estate often provided a deceptive sense of security, a harrowing stillness much like the ocean's surface before the onset of a tempest. For Lyra Thorne, this silence acted as a catalyst for her prose. She sat at the small writing desk in her chamber, the luminescence from her laptop screen washing over her contemplative features, reflecting green eyes that now burned with an alien light. The staccato clicking of the keyboard was the only sound fragmenting the thick atmosphere, until the sudden roar of a high-performance engine tore through the frigid night air of the Milanese outskirts. The doorbell rang incessantly, urgent, petulant, and brimming with arrogance. Enzo had cautioned Lyra about nocturnal visitors, but a writer's curiosity invariably outweighed the fear of established rules. Lyra stepped softly to her door, moving into the corridor and peering down into the main hall through the intricate gaps of the marble balustrade. Standing in the hall below was a woman radiant as a wildfire. She was clad in a floor-length dress of crimson silk that clung to her flawless silhouette, her black hair cascading like oceanic waves, and her lips as ruby-red as fresh gore. This was Bianca Romano, the daughter of Milan's premier shipping tycoon and Dante's long-standing arranged fiancée. Bianca exuded the nobility and haughtiness of one born atop the societal pyramid, a perfect antithesis to Lyra's simple, melancholic, and crystalline presence. "Where is Dante? Tell him I'm here this instant," Bianca commanded Enzo, her shrill voice saturated with possessiveness, as though she were the true sovereign of this house. Dante emerged from his third-floor office. He had discarded his suit jacket, wearing only a black dress shirt with the top buttons undone, radiating a rakish but dangerous aura, the look of a predatory beast that had been disturbed. Bianca immediately lunged toward him, encircling his neck with her arms, attempting to press her heated body against the very chest Lyra had touched just that afternoon, the chest that still bore the bleeding scar she had so carefully bandaged. "Dante, I've missed you to the point of distraction. Why do you persist in avoiding my calls? You know my father will not be pleased by this cold indifference," Bianca whispered, her voice a seductive purr laced with the veiled threat of dynastic power. Lyra felt a strange and uncomfortable constriction within her chest. She told herself it was merely disgust at a cheap theatrical display, a visceral reaction of her intellect against such blatant artificiality. Yet her fingers tightened around the stone railing until her knuckles turned ivory white. She watched Dante. He did not push Bianca away, but his frame was as rigid as a block of granite. His ash-grey eyes involuntarily flickered toward the second floor, and for a fleeting, suspended second, his gaze collided directly with Lyra's, who remained shrouded in the shadows of the gallery. A dangerous, possessive spark ignited in Dante's eyes. He abruptly wrapped his arm around Bianca's waist, hauling her flush against him, yet his frigid voice thundered through the hall, aimed precisely at Lyra. "Housekeeper Thorne, come down and serve the wine." Lyra froze. Her heart thrummed with a mixture of shock and burgeoning indignation. What was he utilizing her for? To humiliate her in front of his fiancée, to remind her of her subordinate rank, or to use her as a shield for his own internal void? She took a profound breath to anchor her final shred of pride, straightened the simple black dress that served as her uniform, and slowly descended the staircase. Each of her steps was under the scrutiny of two pairs of eyes, one overflowing with Bianca's hostility and contempt, and one cold, yet harbouring a blazing, smouldering fire. Dante's. "Who is this? Some new maid you've picked up?" Bianca asked, her eyes raking over Lyra as if examining a common insect. "A new item I found on the street on a rainy night," Dante said nonchalantly, his voice as cruel and razor-sharp as a blade cutting into Lyra's heart. "Lyra, pour the wine for Miss Romano." Lyra held the expensive bottle of vintage wine, her hands still bearing the numbing sensation from the ceramic shards earlier that day. As she leaned forward to pour into the crystal goblet, Bianca intentionally flicked her hand, causing the deep red wine to overflow, soaking Lyra's shirt and dripping onto the pristine white marble floor. "Oh, my apologies. My hand slipped. I'm simply not accustomed to being served by someone who looks so unrefined," Bianca smirked, her eyes gleaming with the malice of one born into spoiled luxury. Lyra stood motionless, the cold wine soaking through the thin fabric into her skin, but the rage within her was hotter than any flame. She looked down at the crimson stain that resembled a bloodstain, then looked up directly into Dante's eyes. He remained seated, watching with an air of detached indifference, like a king observing a humiliating comedy. "Clean it up," Bianca ordered, pointing the toe of her expensive stiletto at the puddle at her feet. "And be thorough about it, you trash." Lyra began to stoop, not because she was submissive, but because she desired to conclude this charade as swiftly as possible, so she could return to her world of words. But before her knees could touch the floor, a large, searing hand clamped around her elbow, hauling her firmly upright with an irresistible force. Dante's strength nearly sent Lyra tumbling into his lap. The entire room fell into a state of extreme silence, so profound that one could hear the wind whistling through the crevices of the doors. Dante looked at Bianca, his grey eyes no longer indifferent, but veiled in a thick, lethal layer of murderous intent that made the air freeze. "I permitted you to come here at this hour, Bianca, but I did not permit you to touch my property." Dante's voice dropped to a low register, carrying a deathly threat that turned Bianca's face pale. "Dante, what are you saying? She's just a maid you picked up. Get out immediately before I change my mind regarding the shipping agreement between our families tomorrow morning," Dante hissed through his teeth, his hand still gripping Lyra, as if he intended to forge her into his own skin. Bianca trembled with fear and humiliation. She looked at Dante, then at Lyra with a look of absolute hatred, before grabbing her bag and fleeing the mansion in a fit of bitter sobbing. When the massive main door slammed shut, Dante still did not release Lyra. He spun her around, pinning her against the cold marble pillar in the hall. The scent of wine mingled with his signature fragrance of sandalwood, creating a suffocating, erotic, and oppressive atmosphere. "Were you really going to kneel?" Dante growled, his eyes burning with a fury mingled with an emotion he himself could not name. "I told you that you are mine. No one in this world is permitted to make you kneel, not even me, without my permission." Lyra looked at him, her breath hitching against his broad chest. "You humiliated me in front of her, called me trash, a picked-up item. And now you play the protector, Dante? What game are you playing? Or is this how you find a pulse for that dead heart of yours?" Dante stared into her fiery green eyes. Lyra's stubbornness, her pride, and her pain were like a venom seeping into his blood, shattering the 3-year icy paralysis. He reached out with his hand, the hand still bandaged from the wound she had tended, to caress her cheek, then slid down to her neck, where her pulse was thrumming frantically with fear and agitation. "I'm not playing any game," he whispered, leaning his head low until his lips were mere millimeters from hers. "I am simply reminding you of your position. You can hate me, you can write terrible things about me into that computer, but tonight you must serve me to atone for even thinking of kneeling before another." Dante abruptly swept Lyra up into his arms, disregarding the wine still soaking her clothes. He walked straight toward the third-floor staircase leading to the bedroom, the sanctuary Enzo had warned her never to enter. That night, Lyra wasn't just a witness to Dante's darkness. She became an intricate part of it, melting into his frantic and desperate possession. In the arms of the devil, she realized a bitter truth. His pain and her resentment were intertwining, creating a dark symphony she never wanted to end. Early the next morning, while Dante was submerged in a rare deep sleep following his usual nightmares, Lyra opened her computer with trembling hands. The words appeared, blurred in the blood-red dawn of Milan. "He does not love me. He is merely possessing me as a lonely child clings to the only toy in a vacant room." But amidst the cruel kisses and possessive touches, I felt him tremble. "He is not owning me. He is begging me not to abandon him in this hell. I am the author of Nocturne, but now, I myself do not know if I am continuing the story or being consumed by it." The Milanese dawn never truly penetrated the inner sanctum of the Valesco estate. The heavy velvet curtains in Dante's bedroom acted as a wall between reality and a dark, lingering realm of nightmares. Lyra awoke in a suffocating silence, feeling the leaden weight of Dante's arms still draped possessively across her waist. The warmth from his chest fanning against the nape of her neck was a gentle yet profound reminder that she was currently a prisoner in his kingdom. She moved with calculated precision, attempting to slip from his embrace without disturbing his slumber. Dante did not look peaceful in sleep. His thick brows remained slightly knitted, and his thin lips were pressed into a tight line as if he were battling ghosts in a persistent nightmare. Lyra paused for a moment, observing his features in the dim light of early morning. This was the man who had deemed her trash, who had coerced her into a slave contract, yet he was also the man who had trembled in her arms last night, as if she were the only lifebuoy in a pitch-black, bottomless ocean. Once she had freed herself, Lyra did not immediately leave the room. A writer's curiosity, or perhaps a woman's instinct to fathom the man who possessed her, guided her footsteps toward the darkest corner of the chamber. There, behind an ancient carved wooden screen, sat a small door she had never seen Enzo touch. The door was unlocked. It opened into a narrow corridor leading to a sequestered room. Lyra stepped inside, and immediately the scent of dried rose powder mingled with the smell of aging dust, flooded her senses. Inside was a world entirely different from the harsh, cold minimalism of the mansion. It was a shrine of memories. White silk dresses hung in glass cabinets like ghost skins. Dancing shoes were arranged with clinical precision, and hundreds of black and white photographs were plastered across the walls. Lyra moved toward the largest photograph set upon a marble pedestal. In the photo was Dante, several years younger, his smile radiant and bursting with life. A smile Lyra had never witnessed in reality. Standing beside him was a woman with a beauty as fragile as mist, her hand adorned with a sparkling engagement ring. That was Isabella. The low, gravelly voice speaking right behind her caused Lyra to jump, her heart nearly leaping from her chest. Dante stood there, having appeared out of nowhere, his ash-grey eyes burning into the photo with a sense of devastation so profound that Lyra felt the air around them being sucked dry. He was shirtless, the scars on his back revealed under the dim light, like a map of pain and regret. "I do not permit anyone to enter here," Dante said, but his voice lacked its usual murderous edge. It carried an absolute hollowness, a deep-seated sorrow that even absolute power could not mitigate. What happened to her?" Lyra whispered, unable to tear her eyes away from Dante's lost smile in the photograph. Dante stepped closer, his fingers grazing the glass of the photo in a gesture of both worship and agony. 3 years ago, an explosion right before the church wedding. Enemies wanted my life, but she pushed me out of the car just as the bomb detonated. He turned to look at Lyra, his gaze so cold it made her shiver. Since then, I have been dead along with her. I haven't felt anything. No love, no desire, not even physical pain, until you crashed into me under that rain. Lyra looked at him, and for the first time, she saw the mask of the Mafia tyrant completely shatter. "So that's why you kept me? To make me a proxy for what you've lost?" Dante stepped forward, cornering her amidst the mementos of the deceased. He braced his hands against the wall, trapping her within the scent of sandalwood and suffocating oppression. "You cannot be a proxy for Isabella, Lyra. She was an angel, and you are venom. Isabella brought peace, but you bring chaos. You make me hurt, you make me angry, and you make me feel like a breathing human being again. That is your sin." Lyra did not back down. She reached out, lightly touching the long scar on his chest, the spot closest to his heart. "You cannot use pain as an excuse to possess me, Dante. I am not your healing remedy. I am the one who will write the truth about you." Dante gripped her chin, forcing her to meet his eyes, which were burning with an intense, possessive fire. "Then write, Lyra. Dissect me with your pen, but remember this. Every line you write is paid for with the very freedom you forfeit in this house." That afternoon, a subtle shift in power began within the estate. Lyra was no longer a silent maid in the shadows. After seeing Dante confront Bianca for her sake, the staff began to look at her with eyes of wariness and newfound respect. Enzo granted her the authority to decide the dinner menu and even to reorganize the third-floor library, a place Dante had always considered hallowed ground. Lyra utilized this freedom to penetrate deeper into his kingdom. She cleaned the library, but instead of just dusting, she began to read his private journals. She discovered that Dante was not merely a ruthless mafia don. He was a brilliant strategist with sharp insights into economics and philosophy. Every page he had once turned, every line he had underlined, became invaluable material for her novel. She sat at Dante's desk and opened her laptop. Her fingers glided over the keys with incredible speed, as if the words were bleeding out from her flesh to avenge the humiliation she had endured. He imprisons himself in a mausoleum of lost love, but has unwittingly opened the door for an invader to enter. He does not know that the woman he is using to regain his senses is the very one who is stripping him of his power, piece by piece, through the written word. Every time he touches me, he is handing me a fragment of his soul, without even knowing it. And when this book ends, the whole world will see that Dante Valesco is no longer the king of Milan. He will be merely a man kneeling at the feet of the author of his own life. Just then, the library door opened. Dante walked in, carrying a stack of important financial dossiers. He froze when he saw Lyra sitting in his place, the laptop emitting a faint blue glow reflected in her green eyes. "What are you doing at my desk?" Dante asked, his tone laced with suspicion, but lacking his usual bite. Lyra calmly closed the computer, not a hint of fluster in her movements. "I am doing my work. Writing is the only way I keep myself from going insane in this captivity." Dante approached, setting the dossiers on the table, his eyes fixed on the laptop. "I told you I own everything of yours, including what you write in there. You may own my body under this contract, Dante, but my thoughts are the one thing you will never be rich enough to buy." Lyra stood up, facing him with unyielding pride. Dante looked at her for a long time, the silence stretching so long that Lyra could hear her own heart thrumming. Suddenly, he broke into a low, rare, and genuinely amused chuckle. "You are the only person in this city who dares to say no to my face and still draws breath, Lyra. Perhaps that is why I cannot discard you yet." He picked up a dossier and pushed it toward her. "Tonight, the Romano family has sent an official invitation for a reconciliation dinner. Lorenzo wants to discuss the new shipping routes. I want you to go with me, not as a housekeeper." "Then as what?" Lyra cocked an eyebrow. Dante looked deep into her eyes, his ash-grey gaze containing a stormy premonition, but also a sharp challenge. "As the woman of Dante Valesco, I want Bianca and her father to see that what I picked up from the rain is worth more than all their filthy business deals combined. Get ready, Lyra. Tonight, you officially enter hell with me." Lyra understood that this was the moment she stepped out of the shadows to directly confront the most powerful people in Milan. This was no longer a fictional chapter. It was the opening battle for the downfall of an empire, where she would be the one holding the pen to write the finale. The Romano estate sat in the heart of Milan like a fortress of vanity, where Corinthian columns and dazzling crystal chandeliers sought to mask the filthy schemes of the shipping elite. Tonight, the high society gathered here not to taste wine, but to witness the collapse of a business deal, or the beginning of a war. Inside the Rolls-Royce gliding toward the party, the air was as thick as lead. Dante sat there, still possessing that terrifying stillness, but his gaze occasionally swept over Lyra. Tonight, she wasn't wearing the stark black housekeeper uniform. Dante had given her a silk dress in deep crimson, a red as dark as dried blood, clinging to her slender yet vibrant body. The dress featured no jewels, but its simplicity and audacity highlighted Lyra's glowing pale skin and misty green eyes. "You don't look like someone picked up from the street anymore." Dante broke the silence, his voice low and vibrating. He reached out, his rough fingers brushing the tiny diamond necklace he had forced her to wear. "Tonight, your mission is to make them afraid. Use that pen you are so proud of to observe them, and use your presence to make Bianca realize she lost before she even started." Lyra looked directly into his eyes, unblinking. "I am not doing this for you, Dante. I am doing this to finish the story I started. When the doors to the banquet hall opened, Dante Valesco's entrance was always a seismic event. But tonight, the epicenter of that earthquake was the woman on his arm. Whispers began to spread like a virus. Bianca Romano, radiant in a white dress shimmering like a failed bride, froze in the center of the room. Her face distorted from surprise to a profound, visceral hatred. "Dante, you brought this thing here?" Bianca approached, her shrill voice intentionally drawing attention. Dante didn't deign to look at Bianca. He slowly lifted Lyra's hand, placing a light but possessive kiss on her fingers. "This is Lyra, and she is not a thing. She is the only reason I'm interested in sitting at your father's table tonight." The long banquet table was laid with fine porcelain and gleaming silver cutlery. Bianca's father, the tycoon Lorenzo Romano, a man with a face like an aging hawk, sat at the head, his sharp eyes glaring at Lyra. "Valesco, I thought we were here to discuss merging the Mediterranean shipping lines, not to watch my son lead a new doll around," Lorenzo growled. Lyra, now sitting opposite Bianca, felt the insult rising, but she was no longer the girl hiding under the Milanese rain. She offered a small smile, one of sharp writer's observation. "Mr. Romano," Lyra spoke, her voice clear yet commanding, silencing the table. "Mediterranean shipping is currently facing a 15% drop in profits due to the rise of northern free ports and the obsolescence of the logistics systems your family controls. If Dante chooses to partner with you, it is an act of salvage, not a fair merger. A doll like me perhaps understands that better than his former fiancée sitting there, who is only concerned with her lipstick shade." A deathly silence fell over the room. Bianca turned purple with humiliation, while Lorenzo stood stunned. Dante, holding a glass of red wine, slowly swirled it. A spark of pride and intense possessivity flashed in his eyes. He had no idea this girl knew his numbers so well. Who are you?" Lorenzo hissed. "I am the person your daughter called trash," Lyra replied nonchalantly, picking up her silver fork and cutting the steak on her plate perfectly. "But in the shadows, Mr. Romano, trash is sometimes the only thing that can see the rot of thrones made of fool's gold." The banquet ended in a subterranean chaos. Lorenzo Romano was insulted in his own home, and Bianca screamed in desperation. As Dante led Lyra out of the mansion under the hazy Milanese moonlight, he suddenly pulled her into a secluded corner behind thorny rose bushes. He pinned her against the wall, his breath smelling of wine and longing. "What did you do tonight, Lyra? You didn't just humiliate them. You made me lose my mind." Dante didn't wait for her answer. He leaned down, his kiss tonight no longer one of punishment or cold possession. It carried a heat, a desperation of a drowning man who had just found breath. Lyra felt the trembling in his hands, the hands of the king of Milan shaking because of a girl he had once despised. In that moment, Lyra realized she was losing control. She was no longer standing on the outside observing and writing. She had become the protagonist, and her heart, which she thought had frozen after years of running, was thrumming wildly in her chest. Returning to the estate, Lyra sat at her desk. The laptop opened, but her fingers hovered over the keys. She looked in the mirror, seeing the smudged lipstick on her lips and the warmth of Dante still lingering on her neck. She began to type, but this time the words were filled with pain. "The predator has fallen into the trap, but the hunter has also discovered she loves the prey. I wanted to destroy his kingdom, but now I only want to fade away within it. Dante Valesco is no longer a character in my novel. He is my pain, he is my breath, and he is the chapter I never want to end." Outside the door, Dante stood still. He had heard the clicking of her computer. He knew she was writing about him, dissecting him. But instead of anger, he felt a strange peace. If he had to be exposed to the world, he wanted her to be the one to do it, because only she saw the real man behind his scars. Lyra calmly closed the computer. I am doing my work. Writing is how I keep myself from going insane in this house. Dante approached, setting the documents on the table, his eyes fixed on the laptop. I told you I own everything of yours, including what you write. You may own my body, Dante, but my thoughts are the one thing you can never buy. Lyra stood up, facing him with unyielding pride. Dante looked at her for a long time, then suddenly broke into a low, rare chuckle. You are the only one who dares to say no to me, Lyra. Perhaps that is why I haven't killed you yet. He picked up a book she had just reorganized, flipping through it. Tonight, we have a dinner with the Romano family. I want you to go with me, not as a housekeeper. Then as what? Dante looked deep into her eyes, his ash-grey gaze containing a stormy premonition. As the woman of Dante Valesco, I want Bianca and her father to see that I have found something more precious than every business deal in the world. Lyra understood that this was the moment she stepped out of the shadows to directly confront the most powerful people in Milan. This was no longer just a chapter in a story. It was the opening battle for the downfall of an empire. The night in Milan following the banquet at the Romano estate did not bring its usual tranquility. Wind whistled through the crevices of the marble doors at the Valesco mansion, carrying the chill of the Alps and the scent of a storm on the verge of eruption. Lyra Thorne sat at her small writing desk in her room, the light from her computer screen casting a pale, solitary glow over her face. Her fingers were still trembling, not from the cold, but from the aftershocks of what had occurred at that banquet tonight. She had seen the collapse in Lorenzo Romano's eyes, the madness in Bianca's gaze, and most importantly, she had witnessed the terrifying fire of possessiveness in Dante's eyes. She began to type, every word acting as a heartbeat of her terrified soul. The predator thinks he has mastered the game, but he does not know that the wounded wolf is the most brutal. Tonight, I helped Dante Valesco tear the mask off the Romano family, but simultaneously, I turned myself into the sole target of a bloody hunt. Is that the sound of the wind I hear? Or is it the laughter of the devil waiting out there? Suddenly, an unnatural stillness enveloped the mansion. The wind chimes on the balcony ceased their movement, and even the chirping of insects vanished. Lyra froze, her survival instinct as a fugitive of many years, surging forward. She gently closed her computer, reaching beneath her pillow to grip the small knife she always kept near. Her room door was not burst open loudly. It was opened with a skeleton key, eerily silent. 3 dark silhouettes slipped inside, their breath reeking of gunpowder and chemicals. Before Lyra could scream, a brutal hand clamped over her mouth, and a chloroform-soaked cloth was pressed firmly against her nose. The world began to spin, the streetlights of Milan blurred, and the last image she saw was the hawk tattoo of the Romano family on the kidnapper's wrist. Dante Valesco jerked awake in his office. An invisible unease constricted his chest, a sensation he hadn't felt since the explosion 3 years ago. He glanced at the clock. 3 a.m. Dante stood and strode toward Lyra's room, driven by an inexplicable impulse. The door was slightly ajar. As Dante pushed it open, a gust of cold air hit his lungs. The room was vacant. Her computer lay on the floor, the screen still faintly illuminating a half-written paragraph. On the white bedsheets lay a snapped, thorny rose, the cruel signature of Lorenzo Romano's revenge. "Enzo! Marco!" Dante's roar shook the hallways. Within minutes, the entire estate awoke in a chaos of weaponry and sharp commands. Dante gripped his silver-handled gun, his ash-grey eyes now turned to the pitch black of death. The paralysis of years had vanished, replaced by a primal rage burning through his veins. "I don't care what you do," Dante hissed through his teeth as he faced his security team. "If I don't see her within an hour, I will burn the entire port of Milan to the ground. Find Lorenzo Romano and tell him that tonight I will return to him double what he intended for Lyra." Dante himself drove the convertible, tearing through the night. He knew where Lorenzo would take her, the old warehouses at the South Port, where the Romanos still conducted their subterranean purges. The wind lashed his face, cold, but not as cold as the thought that Lyra might be in pain. He realized a bitter truth. He didn't just want to possess her. He needed her to feel alive. At the warehouse smelling of rust and sea salt, Lyra awoke with her hands bound tightly to a wooden chair. The dim light from the overhead filament bulb made everything appear hazy. "You're quite something, Valesco's little whore." Bianca Romano stepped out from the shadows, her face twisted in resentment. She held a small knife, the cold blade grazing Lyra's pale cheek. "Tonight, you humiliated me. I'm going to carve up this face to see if Dante is still interested in trash like you." Lyra looked directly into Bianca's eyes without a shred of fear. "You can carve my face, but you can never erase the truth that you are the loser. Dante has never looked at you the way he looks at me, Bianca. You're just a discarded pawn." Bianca let out a frenzied scream, raising her hand to stab Lyra's shoulder, but a horrific explosion tore the warehouse door open. Boom! A haze of smoke and dust rose. Amidst the atmosphere thick with the smell of gunpowder, Dante Valesco entered like a demon stepped out of hell. He wasn't in a suit. His black shirt was drenched in sweat and dust, and in his hands were two smoking guns. Romano's henchmen fell like wheat before his ruthless precision. "Dante, don't step closer, or I'll kill her." Bianca panicked, pressing the knife against Lyra's throat. Dante stopped, but his silence was more terrifying than 1,000 screams. He didn't look at Bianca. He only stared at the small drop of blood, oozing where the blade touched Lyra's neck. The killing intent radiating from him forced even the remaining Romano thugs to recoil. "Bianca." Dante's voice was light, yet carried a deathly curse. "If one more drop of her blood hits this floor, I will ensure that not a single Romano is left alive to see tomorrow's sun." At that moment, Marco and the Valesco security team burst in from behind, surrounding the entire area. Bianca realized she was at a dead end. In a moment of desperation, she prepared to stab Lyra, but a precise shot from Dante hit her wrist, sending the knife flying. Dante lunged forward like a whirlwind, shoving Bianca aside and kneeling before Lyra. He used his trembling hands that usually knew only how to kill, to cut the ropes chafing her skin. "Lyra, look at me," Dante whispered, his voice cracking. Lyra fell into his arms, feeling the warmth and frantic heartbeat of the man. She saw in his eyes not cold possession, but an ultimate fear, the fear of losing her. "I'm okay, Dante. I still have my pen," she whispered, though her breath was still ragged. Dante squeezed her in his arms, ignoring the dozens of muzzles surrounding them. He swept her up into his arms, walking through the corpses and gunpowder haze of the warehouse. Lorenzo Romano was subdued by Marco, kneeling on the floor. "Handle him," Dante ordered Marco without looking back. "Let him see his empire crumble before he dies." Back at the mansion, Dante personally carried Lyra into his third-floor bedroom. He meticulously cleaned the wounds on her wrists, his movements so gentle they made Lyra's nose sting. 3 years ago, I let Isabella die before my eyes because I was too arrogant. Dante suddenly spoke while bandaging her. I swore I would never let anyone into my heart again, so I would never have to feel that pain a second time. But tonight, when I saw you vanish, I realized I've lost completely. He looked up at her, his ash-grey eyes burning with the most intense and sincere emotion. You aren't trash, nor are you an object. You are my breath, Lyra. If you want to destroy my kingdom with your pen, do it, as long as you stay here by my side. Lyra looked at him, realizing the symphony she was writing had turned to a chapter she herself couldn't foresee. She was no longer an anonymous observer. She was the woman who had tamed the devil of Milan. She reached out, lightly touching Dante's angular cheek. I'm not going anywhere, Dante, because our story has only just begun. That night, while Dante drifted off from exhaustion beside her bed, Lyra opened her laptop. New words appeared, brilliant and strong under the moonlight. The devil doesn't learn to love through sweet words. He learns through blood and sacrifice. The Romano Empire has fallen, but from those ashes, a new kingdom has been built. There, I am no longer a fugitive, and he is no longer a ghost. We are two fragments that found each other in this cruel life. The morning following the annihilation of the Romano warehouse was unnervingly bright. Sunlight, sharp and intrusive, cut through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Valesco estate, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air like microscopic shards of glass. For Lyra Thorne, the world felt fragile, as if the reality she had known had been stripped away, leaving only the raw, throbbing nerves of a life she hadn't planned to lead. She was not in her small, adjacent room. She woke up in the center of Dante's massive, obsidian silk-draped bed. The scent of sandalwood and expensive tobacco was everywhere, a scent that had once signaled her captivity, but now felt like a shroud of protection. She moved her arm, wincing as the movement pulled at the bandages on her wrists. The purple bruises left by the ropes were a grim reminder that in the world of Dante Valesco, safety was a luxury paid for in violence. Beside her, the bed was empty, but the pillow still held the indentation of a man's weight. Dante had stayed until dawn. Lyra sat up, her long hair falling in tangled waves over her shoulders. She looked at her laptop, which Enzo had retrieved from the floor of her room and placed on the bedside table. It was closed, its silver surface reflecting the cold opulence of the room. She reached for it, but her fingers hovered. The story she was writing, the one that had started as a weapon of vengeance, was now a mirror she was afraid to look into. The door opened silently. Dante entered, no longer the blood-splattered demon of the night before. He was dressed in a pristine white dress shirt, the sleeves rolled up to reveal the dark ink on his forearms, and the bandage Lyra had applied to his hand days ago. In his hand was a tray with coffee and a single, perfect croissant. "You should be resting," he said, his voice a low, resonant baritone that vibrated in the quiet room. He placed the tray on her lap, his eyes scanning her face with a predatory intensity that had softened into something resembling devotion. "I've spent my whole life resting in the shadows, Dante," Lyra replied, her voice steady despite the flutter in her chest. "Action is what keeps me alive." Dante sat on the edge of the bed, the mattress dipping under his weight. He reached out, his thumb grazing the bandage on her wrist. The touch was feather-light, a stark contrast to the man who had executed 5 men 12 hours ago without blinking. "The Romanos are gone, Lyra. Lorenzo is being dealt with, and Bianca has been sent to a place where she can no longer hurt anyone. You are safe." "Safe," Lyra repeated the word, tasting the irony. "In a house of ghosts, protected by a man who burns empires for breakfast. Is that what safety looks like in Milan?" Dante's jaw tightened. It's the only safety I can provide. I am not a hero, Lyra. I am the man who keeps the monsters at bay by being the worst monster of them all. He leaned in, his forehead pressing against hers. For a moment, the King of Milan was just a man seeking solace. But you are the only thing in this world I will not allow to be tarnished. Not by them, and not by me. Lyra reached up, her fingers curling around the collar of his shirt. Then stop treating me like a porcelain doll that might break. If I am to stay in this kingdom, I need to know the truth. All of it. Dante sighed, a sound of profound weariness. The truth is a heavy burden, Lyra. It's the reason I haven't felt a pulse in 3 years. But if you want it, I will give it to you. The domestic peace was shattered an hour later by the sound of a helicopter descending upon the estate's private pad. Dante's expression shifted instantly. The softness vanished, replaced by the iron mask of the Valesco patriarch. He stood up, buttoning his shirt and reaching for his jacket. "Stay here," he ordered. "Dante, who is it?" "The only person in Italy I cannot kill," he muttered before exiting the room. Lyra didn't stay. She threw on a silk robe and crept to the balcony overlooking the grand foyer. Down below, the massive oak doors swung open. A woman stepped inside, followed by a troop of assistants and guards. Maria Valesco was 70 years old, but she carried herself with the lethal grace of a black widow. Her silver hair was pulled into a flawless bun, and her eyes, the same ash-grey as Dante's, scanned the foyer with a gaze that found every flaw. She was the matriarch of the Valesco Empire, the woman who had held the family together through 3 wars and a dozen betrayals. "Dante," Maria's voice was like ice clinking in a glass. "I hear you've been busy, tearing down the Romano family over a housekeeper?" Dante stood in the center of the hall, his arms crossed. "Mother, you're early. I expected you to stay in Tuscany until the spring." "And leave my son to destroy 30 years of alliances for a girl he found in the gutter?" Maria stepped closer, her heels clicking like a countdown on the marble floor. "The Romanos were a bridge to the southern ports. Now that bridge is cinders. I want to see her." "No. I am not asking, Dante. If she is the woman who broke your 3-year fast, I want to see if she is worth the blood you've spilled." Lyra decided then that she would not be a secret. She walked down the grand staircase, her silk robe fluttering behind her. She felt Maria's gaze lock onto her, a gaze that weighed her soul and found it wanting. "I am Lyra Thorne," she said, her voice echoing through the foyer. "And I wasn't found in the gutter. I was found in the rain. There is a difference." Maria Valesco went still. She looked at Lyra, then at Dante, then back to Lyra. A slow, chilling smile spread across the older woman's face. "She has a tongue. That's dangerous, Dante. Tongues are the first things I usually cut out." "Touch her, and I will forget you are my mother," Dante said, his voice so low it was barely a whisper, yet it carried the weight of an executioner's blade. The tension in the room was a physical weight. Lyra stood her ground, her green eyes fixed on the woman who represented everything she hated about power. "So this is the girl," Maria mused, walking a circle around Lyra. Small, pale, smelling of jasmine and ink. Why ink? Dante's eyes flickered toward Lyra, a silent warning. But Maria had already noticed the laptop on the table in the lounge. She walked over, her gloved hand hovering over the device. "Enzo tells me she spends her hours typing. What are you writing, little bird? A confession? Or a map of our weaknesses?" "I write stories, Signora Valesco," Lyra replied. "Stories about people who think they are gods, and the shadows that eventually swallow them." Maria laughed, a dry, rattling sound. "A philosopher? How quaint. Dante, the board of directors is in an uproar. They think you've lost your mind. They're calling for a vote of no confidence. The Romanos had friends, and those friends want your head on a platter. Let them come, Dante said. I've had a taste of life again, Mother. I find I rather enjoy the fight. Maria turned back to the door. I will be staying in the East Wing. We will have dinner tonight. Lyra, you will attend. Wear something that doesn't scream, victim. I despise the scent of fear at the table. When the matriarch left, the hall felt colder. Dante walked to Lyra, his hands gripping her shoulders. You shouldn't have come down. She is more dangerous than Lorenzo Romano ever was. She doesn't use knives. She uses the law, the board, and the very foundations of this family. I'm not afraid of her, Dante, Lyra said, though her heart was thudding. I've dealt with monsters my whole life. At least your mother is honest about being one. She's not just a monster, Lyra. She's the architect of this hell. Dante looked at her, a profound shadow in his eyes. And she will try to find your breaking point. She'll find out about London. She'll find out about your secret identity. Lyra went cold. If Maria found out she was the author of the very stories that were exposing the underworld secrets, she wouldn't just be a housekeeper. She would be an enemy of the state. Then I'll just have to write a better ending than she can, Lyra whispered. That afternoon, Lyra sat in the library, the one place she felt at home. She opened her laptop, her fingers moving with a frantic energy. The Queen Mother has arrived, draped in pearls and malice. She looks at me and sees a variable to be eliminated. She doesn't realize that I am not just a girl in her son's bed. I am the chronicler of their demise. Dante is torn between the blood that created him and the woman who woke him up. Tonight, the dinner table will be a battlefield, and I will need more than just ink to survive. She paused, looking out at the Milanese skyline. She thought about her stepfather still being dealt with by Dante's men. She thought about Isabella, the ghost who still lived in the secret room. And she thought about Dante, the man who had just threatened to kill his own mother for her. She began to type again, the words flowing like a river of fire. Love in this house is not a soft thing. It is a jagged, bloody shard of glass. It cuts you even as you hold it. Dante thinks he is protecting me, but he doesn't realize that I am the one holding the mirror. And tonight, I will make them all look into it. By the time evening fell, Lyra was ready. She chose a dress of midnight blue, velvet and heavy, a color that made her look like part of the shadows. She didn't wear the diamonds Dante gave her. She wore nothing but her pride. Dinner was served in the formal dining hall, a room of gold leaf and dark wood that felt like a courtroom. Dante sat at the head, Maria at the foot, and Lyra in the middle. The silence was punctuated only by the silver clinking against fine china. So, Lyra, Maria said, dabbing her lips with a lace napkin, tell me about London. Your files are curiously blank before 2022. It's almost as if you didn't exist. Dante's grip on his wine glass tightened. Mother, that's enough. Nonsense, Dante. I'm just getting to know our guest. Maria's eyes never left Lyra. I found a name in my research. Arthur Thorne, a man of some reputation in the London docks. Does that ring a bell? Lyra's breath hitched. Arthur Thorne, her stepfather, the man she had spent her life running from. He was my stepfather, Lyra said, her voice a thin wire of tension. And he is the reason I am here. I see, Maria smiled, a sharp, shark-like expression. And did you know that Arthur Thorne was a business associate of the Romano family? It seems your arrival in Milan wasn't as accidental as Dante believes. Dante went still. He looked at Lyra, his ash-grey eyes searching hers for a lie. Lyra? I didn't know, Lyra said, the world beginning to tilt. Dante, I swear, I didn't know he had connections here. A beautiful coincidence, Maria purred. Or a very clever plant. A girl who writes stories about the Mafia, who happens to crash into the King of Milan just as the Romano alliance is faltering. It's almost like a plot from a book, isn't it? Dante stood up, the chair screeching against the floor. Out! Everyone out! The assistants and guards scurried away. Maria stayed seated, her expression triumphant. Lyra felt the walls closing in. The story she had been writing, the one where she was the hunter, was being rewritten by a woman who had been playing the game for decades. "Dante, look at me," Lyra pleaded. But Dante wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the laptop she had left on the sideboard. He walked over, flipped it open, and began to read. He imprisons himself in a mausoleum of lost love. The silence that followed was the loudest thing Lyra had ever heard. Dante read for a long time, his face a mask of unreadable stone. Maria watched him, her eyes gleaming with the thrill of the kill. Finally, Dante looked up. He didn't look angry. He looked broken in a way Lyra had never seen. "You've been writing about me since the first night," he said, his voice a hollow rasp. "Every touch, every scar, every moment of weakness. I wasn't your savior, Lyra. I was your research." "No, Dante, it started that way, but it changed." "Did it?" Maria intervened, her voice smooth as silk. "Or did the story just get more interesting once you realized he would kill for you? Tell me, Lyra, what's the ending? Do you kill the king and take the crown? Or do you just sell the movie rights?" Lyra looked at Dante, but he turned away. He walked to the window, looking out at the city he ruled. "Enzo!" Dante called out. The butler appeared in the doorway. "Take Miss Thorne to her room. Lock the door. She is not to leave until I decide what to do with her." "Dante, please!" Lyra cried out as Enzo took her arm. Dante didn't turn around. Maria stood up, smoothing her skirt. "Well done, Dante. You finally see. She isn't a person. She's a mirror. And mirrors only show you what you want to see." As Lyra was led away, she realized the final truth. She had written herself into a corner, and in the kingdom of Dante Valesco, there was no such thing as a happy ending. She sat in her room, the lock clicking into place. She opened her laptop one last time. The king has found the truth, but the truth is a lie told by a queen. I am a prisoner in the house I almost called home. Dante thinks I betrayed him, and, in a way, I did. I turned his pain into art. But he doesn't realize that the art is the only thing that made him real. Tonight, the darkness is back. And this time, I don't think either of us will survive the dawn. The lock on the door of Lyra's chamber clicked with a finality that resonated through the very marrow of her bones. It was a cold, mechanical sound. The sound of a bridge collapsing, of a sanctuary turning back into a cage. For the first few hours, Lyra did not move. She sat on the edge of the bed, the midnight blue velvet of her dress feeling like a heavy, suffocating shroud. The silence of the Valesco estate, which she had once begun to find peaceful, was now predatory. It felt as though the concrete walls were leaning in, eager to hear the ragged rhythm of her failing hope. She looked at her hands. They were still stained with the ink of the words that had betrayed her. Maria Valesco had played her like a master violinist, using the truth to create a melody of discord that Dante could not ignore. Lyra realized then that the most dangerous thing in this house wasn't Dante's gun or Maria's influence. It was the narrative, and currently she had lost control of the ending. Across the mansion, in the cavernous expanse of the grand study, Dante Valesco stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows, staring out at the flickering lights of Milan. He felt as though a serrated blade had been drawn across his chest, reopening the scars of the past 3 years. The numbness he had cultivated so carefully was gone, replaced by a raw, throbbing agony. He had allowed himself to feel, to breathe, and to hope only to find that he was merely a character in a drama designed for consumption. Maria sat in the leather armchair behind his desk, her posture regal, her expression one of clinical triumph. She sipped a glass of vintage port, the red liquid dark as arterial blood in the dim light. "You look pathetic, Dante," she said, her voice cutting through the silence. "To be wounded by a girl with a laptop. It's almost embarrassing." Dante didn't turn around. His voice, when it came, was a hollow rasp. "You knew. You knew about Arthur Thorne. You knew she was writing those stories. You waited until the exact moment I let my guard down to destroy it." "I waited until the moment you were about to commit dynastic suicide," Maria corrected him, setting the glass down with a sharp clack. "The board is meeting at dawn. They've seen the reports. They know about the Romano massacre. They know you've compromised the family for a spy. If I hadn't stepped in, they would have had you executed by noon." "She isn't a spy," Dante hissed, finally turning to face her. His ash-grey eyes were bloodshot, glowing with a volatile mixture of rage and grief. "She was running from the same monsters we are. She used the writing to survive." "Does it matter why she did it?" Maria stood up, smoothing her skirts. "The result is the same. She exposed the internal architecture of our world. She turned our scars into entertainment. She looked at you, Dante, and saw a gold mine, not a man." Dante looked at the open laptop on the desk. The words Lyra had written, "He imprisons himself in a mausoleum of lost love," seemed to pulsate on the screen, mocking him. He had thought those words were her way of understanding him. Now, they felt like an autopsy report performed on a living patient. "What do you want me to do with her?" he asked, the words tasting like ash. "The board wants her eliminated, a loose end tied. I, however, see a different utility." Maria walked toward the door, pausing to look back at her son. "The Romano assets are in probate. We need the codes to their offshore accounts, codes that Lorenzo had hidden in a digital ledger. Lyra is a master of the digital world. She found a way to encrypt her stories so that even our best hackers couldn't trace her. She will find those codes for us. And then? And then she goes back to the gutter," Maria said coldly, "if she survives the process." Back in her room, Lyra had stopped crying. The writer in her had taken over, the part of her that analyzed tragedy to find the pivot point. She walked to the window, pressing her forehead against the cool glass. She thought of Dante's face at the dinner table, the way his eyes had gone from warmth to a frozen, jagged glass. She had hurt him more than Bianca's knife ever could. She had commodified his pain. But she also knew Maria Valesco was lying. Maria's claim that Arthur Thorne was a business associate of the Romanos was too convenient. Lyra remembered her stepfather's messy, violent life in London. He wasn't a strategist. He was a blunt instrument. If he had a connection to Milan, it was as a pawn, not a partner. Maria had woven a web of half-truths to catch a girl who thought she was the one weaving the web. The door to her room opened. It wasn't Enzo. It was Dante. He looked different. The white shirt he had worn earlier was rumpled, the top buttons torn away as if he were suffocating. He didn't come close to her. He stayed in the shadows near the door, his presence a dark, heavy weight. "The board wants you dead," he said. No greeting, no emotion, just a statement of fact. "And do you want me dead, Dante?" Lyra asked, her voice surprisingly steady. "I want to know if any of it was real," he replied, taking a step into the light. "The way you looked at me in the library, the way you held me when the nightmares came. Was that just research for the next chapter? Were you waiting for me to bleed so you could describe the color of the ink?" Lyra felt the sting of tears but fought them back. "I started writing about you because I was terrified. I needed to turn you into a character so I could pretend you couldn't hurt me. But the more I wrote, the more I realized I wasn't writing about a monster. I was writing about a man who was lonelier than I was. She stepped toward him, but he recoiled as if she were a flame. "Don't," he growled. "You turned my life into a spectacle. You exposed the secret room. You told the world about Isabella." "I told the world that you were human, Dante. I told them that the King of Milan had a soul. The people who read those stories don't hate you, they ache for you." "I don't want their ache," Dante roared, slamming his fist into the wall. The concrete cracked, dust falling onto his knuckles. "I wanted your truth, and you gave me a plot twist." Lyra stood her ground. "The truth is that my stepfather is a monster. If he had a connection to the Romanos, it's because your mother or Lorenzo Romano bought him to find me. Did you ever think of that? That I wasn't a plant, I was a target?" Dante paused, the rage in his eyes flickering with a momentary doubt. But then he remembered the laptop, the meticulous descriptions of his scars, the cold analysis of his power. "My mother has the board behind her. They've seen your work. They see a security breach that needs to be cauterized. She's offered you a deal. You find the Romano offshore codes and she might let you live." Lyra laughed, a bitter, jagged sound. "She won't let me live, Dante. We both know that. Once I give her what she wants, I'm a liability she'll discard. And you'll let her do it because you're too hurt to see that she's the one pulling the strings." Dante walked to her, his hand gripping her jaw with a force that was almost painful. He forced her to look up into his eyes, eyes that were a storm of ash and fire. "You will do it. Not for her. For me. Prove that you're more than a ghostwriter, Lyra. Prove that you actually care about what happens to this house." "If I do this," Lyra whispered, her lips brushing his thumb, "will you look at the mirror one more time? Not the one your mother showed you, but the one I wrote." Dante didn't answer. He released her and walked out, the lock clicking back into place. The trial of the board began at 4 a.m. in the underground chamber beneath the mansion. This was the true heart of the Valesco Empire, a room made of reinforced steel and shadows, where the 12 directors sat in a semicircle of judgment. Maria sat at the center, a silver queen in a world of lead. Dante stood in the center of the floor, his arms crossed. He looked like the man he was supposed to be, cold, efficient, and merciless. "The girl has agreed," Dante announced to the room. "She will begin the decryption of the Romano ledgers immediately. We will have the assets by sunset." "And the breach?" asked a man with a scarred face, one of the older directors. "The Nocturne stories. They've already reached the feds. They're looking for the secret room, Dante. They're looking for the scars." "The stories are fiction," Dante said, his voice flat. "We've already begun a campaign to discredit the author. By tomorrow, Nocturne will be exposed as a fraud, a disgruntled ex-employee with a vivid imagination. The secret room has been emptied. There is nothing to find." "And the girl herself?" Maria asked, her eyes narrowed. "She is under my control," Dante said. "When the job is done, she will be handled." "Handled how?" the scarred man pressed. Dante's grip on his own wrists tightened until his knuckles turned white. "According to the family code, exile or elimination, I will make the final call." Maria watched him, a faint smile of satisfaction on her face. She thought she had won. She thought she had broken the link between the king and his mirror. But as Dante left the chamber, he didn't head to his office. He headed to the security room. He sat before the monitors, watching the live feed of Lyra's room. She was sitting at the desk he had provided, her fingers moving across the keyboard with a frantic, desperate speed. She wasn't just looking for codes. She was doing something else, something his hackers hadn't noticed yet. She was writing. Dante leaned closer to the screen. Through the high-resolution camera, he could see the words forming on her screen. She wasn't writing about the Romanos. She was writing a message. Dante, the bomb in Isabella's car wasn't planted by the Romanos. I found the transaction in the ledger's hidden metadata. The money came from an offshore account in Tuscany, an account opened 30 years ago. Check the signature, Dante. Check the blood. Dante felt the world tilt. Tuscany, his mother's estate. He looked at the monitor, then at the door where his mother's guard stood. He realized then that Lyra wasn't just his research. She was his witness. She was the only one brave enough to look into the darkness and tell him what she saw, even if it meant he would hate her for it. He stood up, his heart thudding with a rhythm he hadn't felt in years. It wasn't desire. It wasn't rage. It was the terrifying, electric pulse of a man who was finally, truly awake. He walked to the elevator, but he didn't go down to the boardroom. He went up, to the 3rd floor, to the room where Lyra was locked away. He didn't use the key. He kicked the door open with a force that sent the frame splintering. Lyra jumped, her eyes wide with terror as Dante stormed in. He didn't say a word. He grabbed her laptop, his eyes scanning the screen, reading the lines of code and the hidden message she had unearthed. "Is this true?" he asked, his voice a low, vibrating growl. "The data doesn't lie, Dante," Lyra said, her voice trembling. "Lorenzo Romano was a brute, but he loved Isabella in his own twisted way. He wouldn't have killed her. But your mother, she saw Isabella as a weakness. She saw a girl who was making you soft. She didn't want a king with a heart. She wanted a weapon." Dante looked at the screen, then at Lyra. The betrayal he had felt at dinner was nothing compared to this. The woman who had birthed him, who had raised him to be a god, had murdered the only thing he had ever loved to ensure his perfection. And he had spent 3 years serving her, mourning a tragedy she had architected. "They're coming for you," Dante said, his voice stripped of everything but cold, hard purpose. "The board. They don't want the codes. They want you silenced before you find the rest of the truth." "What are we going to do?" Lyra asked. Dante looked at her, and for the first time, he saw her, truly saw her. Not as a maid, not as an item, not as a writer, but as his partner in this beautiful, terrible hell. "We're going to finish the story, Lyra," Dante said, reaching for his gun. "But this time, we're writing it in blood." He grabbed her hand, his fingers interlocking with hers. The warmth of her palm was the only thing that felt real in a world made of lies. "Tonight, the Valesco Empire dies," Dante whispered, "and we're the ones who are going to burn it down." As they stepped out into the hallway, the sirens began to wail. Maria's voice came over the intercom, cold and final. "Dante, you've made your choice. You've chosen the mirror over the crown, so be it. Security, terminate the breach." Dante pulled Lyra close, shielding her with his body as the first set of guards appeared at the end of the hallway. "Hold on to me," he growled. The hunt was no longer a game. It was a revolution. And as the first shots rang out, Lyra realized that she finally had her ending. It wasn't a happy one. It wasn't a sad one. It was the only one that mattered. The truth. The air in the 3rd-floor corridor of the Valesco estate had turned into a thick, suffocating soup of ozone and impending violence. The red emergency lights pulsed like the rhythmic beating of a dying heart, casting long, distorted shadows against the brutalist concrete walls. Lyra Thorne felt the vibration of the mansion's heavy machinery grinding to a halt. Maria had initiated a total lockdown, turning the estate's sophisticated security systems into a web of lethal traps. Dante's hand was a searing anchor around hers. His grip was no longer the calculated, distant hold of a master. It was the desperate, ironclad clutch of a man who had just realized he was standing on the precipice of losing everything for the second time. He didn't look back at her as he checked the magazine of his bang-back handgun. His eyes were fixed on the far end of the hallway, where the silhouettes of the Valesco elite guard were beginning to materialize through the haze. "Dante, if we go through them, there's no coming back," Lyra whispered, her voice barely audible over the rising wail of the sirens. "The board, the families. You're declaring war on the world that made you." Dante finally turned, his ash-grey eyes burning with a terrifying crystalline clarity. "That world died the moment my mother signed Isabella's death warrant in Tuscany. I've been living in a tomb, Lyra. You're the only thing in this house that isn't a ghost." He stepped closer, his forehead grazing hers for a singular, fractured second. "Stay behind me. Don't look at their faces. Just run." The first volley of gunfire shattered the silence, the bullets chewing into the expensive oak paneling and sending splinters of wood flying like shrapnel. Dante reacted with a fluid, lethal grace that Lyra had only ever written about. He moved like a predator born of the shadows, his every shot a precise punctuation mark in a sentence of death. He wasn't just fighting, he was dismantling his past with every pull of the trigger. Lyra followed, her heart hammering against her ribs so hard it felt like it might burst. She clutched her laptop to her chest, the weapon that had started this revolution, feeling the weight of the truths it contained. They reached the service elevator, but Dante shook his head. "Maria will have cut the power to the lifts. We take the internal staircase through the library. It's the only part of the house not mapped by the secondary security grid." They lunged into the stairwell just as a grenade detonated in the corridor behind them. The shockwave threw them forward, the roar of the explosion ringing in Lyra's ears. Dante caught her, his body acting as a shield against the falling debris. Dust and smoke filled the air, turning the stairwell into a grey, liminal space. "Are you hit?" Dante's voice was a ragged growl as he scanned her for blood. "I'm fine, go." They descended into the library, the room where they had once shared a moment of intellectual intimacy. Now the shelves of nihilistic philosophy and military strategy were being shredded by suppressed gunfire from the balconies above. Maria's voice erupted again over the intercom, sounding horribly calm, almost bored. "Dante, this is beneath you. To die in the dust of old books for a girl who used your trauma as a plot point? Think of the legacy. Think of the blood you carry." Dante didn't look at the speakers. He fired upward, a tactical strike that sent a heavy crystal chandelier crashing down onto the guards on the eastern mezzanine. "My legacy is ash, Mother, and I'm about to provide the fire." He led Lyra through a hidden passage behind the shelves, a narrow, dark artery that led toward the mansion's underground motor pool. As they moved through the darkness, Lyra felt the suffocating weight of the concrete above them. She thought of the story she had been writing, the one where she was the hunter. She had been so wrong. In the kingdom of the Valescos, everyone was a victim of the architecture. "Why Tuscany?" Lyra asked, her voice echoing in the narrow tunnel. Why did she wait 30 years to open that account? "She didn't," Dante replied, his footsteps echoing a hollow cadence. "She opened it when my father died. It was her insurance policy, a way to fund the things the board wouldn't approve. She didn't just kill Isabella to make me a weapon. She did it to protect the purity of the family line. Isabella was a Romano. To Maria, a merger of blood was a dilution of power." They reached the motor pool, a vast underground garage filled with the Valesco fleet. But Maria had anticipated this. Standing in their path was Marco, Dante's most trusted lieutenant, his weapon leveled at Dante's chest. "Boss," Marco said, his voice thick with a genuine, agonizing regret. "Don't do this. The matriarch has promised a seat on the board to anyone who brings her head." He gestured toward Lyra. "Step aside. You're the king. You don't burn the palace because of a mirror." Dante stepped in front of Lyra, his shadow swallowing her whole. "Marco, you've stood by me for 15 years. You saw me bleed. You saw me turn into stone. Did you ever think to ask why I stopped breathing?" "It's the life we chose, boss." "No," Dante said, his voice dropping to a deathly whisper. "It's the life she chose for us. She killed Isabella, Marco. Not the Romanos, not the feds, my mother." Marco's aim wavered, a flicker of shock crossing his scarred face. In that split second of doubt, Dante didn't fire. He lunged. The two men collided in a brutal, visceral struggle of muscle and bone. Dante fought with a feral desperation, his fists raining down with the weight of 3 years of repressed grief. It wasn't a clean fight. It was an exorcism. Lyra watched, paralyzed, as Dante pinned Marco against the side of a black SUV. He didn't kill him. He slammed the butt of his gun against Marco's temple, knocking him unconscious. "I can't kill everyone I once loved," Dante panted, his chest heaving as he fumbled for the keys in Marco's pocket. He shoved Lyra into the passenger seat of a reinforced Mercedes and roared the engine to life. The garage doors were beginning to hiss shut, the heavy steel plates descending like a guillotine. Dante floored the accelerator. The tires shrieked against the polished concrete, the scent of burning rubber filling the cabin. They cleared the gate by a fraction of an inch, the steel shearing the roof's spoiler as they erupted out into the cool Milanese night. But they weren't free. Behind them, the estate's secondary perimeter lights flared to life, and 3 black SUVs peeled out from the shadows of the cypress trees. Maria was committing everything. She couldn't let the truth leave the hill. Lyra opened her laptop, her fingers flying across the keys, even as the car swerved violently around a hairpin turn. "Dante, I'm uploading the metadata from the Romano ledger to a secure public cloud. If we don't make it, the story goes live at dawn. Every transaction, every Tuscany signature, every cent of blood money." "Upload it now," Dante growled, his eyes fixed on the rearview mirror. "The truth is our only leverage. If I do, Maria will lose everything. The board will turn on her." "That's the point, Lyra. Burn it all." As the progress bar on the screen crawled toward 90%, the lead SUV behind them opened fire. The rear window of the Mercedes exploded, shards of reinforced glass raining down on them. Lyra ducked, her heart screaming. Dante steered with one hand, his other hand reaching out to steady her. "Hold on." He slammed on the brakes, performing a violent J-turn in the middle of the narrow mountain road. The pursuing SUV, caught off guard, swerved to avoid a head-on collision and tumbled over the sheer embankment. It disappeared into the abyss, a ball of orange fire erupting seconds later. Lyra looked at her screen. Upload complete. "It's done," she whispered. "The world knows." Dante didn't slow down. He drove toward the city centre, toward the neon lights of Milan that had once seemed so hostile. Now they were a beacon. "Where are we going?" "To the Inferno," Dante said, a dark, ironic smile twisting his lips. "It's the only place Maria can't reach without starting a public massacre. And it's where I started this story. It's where I'll finish it." They reached the nightclub an hour before dawn. The neon sign was flickering, the O in Inferno buzzing with a dying energy. Dante led Lyra through the back entrance, past the dressing rooms where she had once trembled behind a silk mask. The club was empty, the air smelling of stale gin and cold ambition. Dante sat her down in the center of the stage, the same stage where he had first seen her trash shine like a diamond. He sat beside her, his gun resting on his knee, his eyes staring into the empty VIP lounges. "She's coming," Lyra said. "I know." Minutes later, the front doors of the club were kicked open. Maria Valesco walked in alone. She didn't bring her guards, she didn't need them. She walked down the center aisle, her heels clicking a rhythmic, funerary beat on the hardwood floor. She stopped at the foot of the stage, looking up at her son. "You've published the ledger," Maria said, her voice devoid of its usual polished veneer. It was raw, ancient, and filled with a terrifying vacuum. "The feds are at the estate. The board has already issued a termination order for me. Are you happy, Dante? You've destroyed a century of work for a woman who will leave you the moment she has enough material for her next bestseller." Dante stood up, his height imposing in the dim light of the stage. "I didn't destroy it, Mother. You did. You destroyed it 3 Nirm ago when you decided Isabella's heart was a threat to your ledger." Maria looked at Lyra, a flash of genuine, unadulterated hatred in her grey eyes. "You think you've won, little bird. You've given him the truth, but look at him. He's a king without a kingdom, a man with nothing but a girl and a gun. How long do you think that love will last in the cold?" Lyra stood up beside Dante, her hand finding his. "It will last longer than your empire did, Maria, because our story isn't built on a grave." Maria reached into her small designer clutch. Dante leveled his gun, his finger tightening on the trigger. But Maria didn't pull out a weapon. She pulled out a small, gold-encased vial. "I will not be handled by the board," she said, her voice a ghostly whisper. "And I will not be judged by a son who chose a mirror over his blood." She drank the liquid in one swallow. Dante lunged forward, leaping off the stage, but it was too late. The toxin was fast-acting, a Valesco secret. Maria collapsed into his arms, her eyes fixed on the ceiling of the club. "I made you a god," she wheezed, her hand clutching Dante's shirt. "No," Dante whispered, tears finally breaking through the grey of his eyes. "You made me a ghost. She made me a man." Maria's hand went limp. The matriarch of Milan was dead in the house of sin she had helped build. Dante sat on the floor of the club, holding his mother's body, the silence of the inferno more profound than any grave. Lyra walked down from the stage and sat beside him, wrapping her arms around his shaking shoulders. The sun began to rise over Milan, the first rays of light hitting the neon sign outside. The inferno was dark. The king was gone. "What now?" Lyra asked softly. Dante looked at her, the grey in his eyes finally clear, finally human. He looked at the laptop, then at the doors leading out to the city. "Now," Dante said, "we go to the beginning. We find a place where the air doesn't smell like ink or blood. We write a story that doesn't have a middle." "Just a beginning?" "Just a beginning," Dante whispered. As they walked out of the club, leaving the ghosts behind, Lyra opened her laptop one last time. She didn't write a chapter. She wrote a single line. "The king has fallen. The mirror has shattered. And for the first time in my life, I don't need to write the ending to know that I am finally free." The safe house was a small, weather-beaten villa on the shores of Lake Como, far removed from the brutalist concrete and gilded trauma of Milan. It was a place Dante had purchased years ago under a name that didn't exist in any official ledger, a phantom property for a man who had spent his life preparing for a disappearance he never truly believed would come. Here, the air didn't smell like gunpowder or the sterile, oppressive scent of floor wax. It smelled of damp earth, pine needles, and the vast, indifferent cold of the water. For the first 48 hours, Lyra Thorne did not speak. She sat on the porch, wrapped in one of Dante's oversized wool sweaters, watching the mist cling to the surface of the lake like a shroud. Her laptop sat on the wooden table beside her, closed for the first time in months. The story was out. The metadata she had uploaded had ignited a firestorm that was currently consuming the Valesco board of directors and the remnants of the Romano family. The news was filled with the Valesco leak, but here, amidst the ancient trees, the world felt agonizingly still. Dante was a shadow in the periphery. He moved through the small house with a quiet, efficient gravity, his footsteps no longer carrying the echoing authority of a king. He spent hours on a secure satellite phone, coordinating the final dissolution of his assets, ensuring that Enzo and the staff who hadn't betrayed him were moved to safety with enough money to never look back. He was dismantling his life with the same surgical precision he had once used to build it. On the third evening, the sun dipped behind the mountains, painting the sky in bruises of purple and gold. Dante walked onto the porch carrying 2 glasses of wine. He set one down in front of Lyra and leaned against the railing, his silhouette sharp against the fading light. "The board is gone," he said, his voice a low rasp that seemed to grate against the silence. "Half of them are in custody. The other half, they won't be a problem anymore. My mother's lawyers have released the final statement. It's over, Lyra." Lyra finally turned her head, her green eyes looking hollow in the twilight. "Over? How can it be over when I can still smell the smoke every time I close my eyes? How can it be over when the man I wrote about is standing in front of me, looking like a ghost of himself?" Dante looked down at his glass, the red wine dark as the secrets they had buried. "You didn't just write about a ghost, Lyra. You wrote about a man who was waiting for permission to die. You gave me that, and then you gave me a reason to stay." He sat beside her, the old wooden bench creaking under his weight. He reached out, his fingers hesitating before they finally brushed against her cheek. "I've spent 3 years feeling nothing. Now, I feel everything, and it's terrifying. I feel the weight of every life I took to protect a lie. I feel the coldness of my mother's final breath. But mostly, I feel you. And I don't know what to do with that." Lyra reached out, her fingers interlocking with his. Her grip was tight, desperate. "You don't have to do anything, Dante. For the first time in both our lives, we don't have to be the king or the author. We just have to be people who survived." "Is that enough?" Dante asked, his eyes searching hers for an answer he didn't think he deserved. "It has to be," she whispered. The weeks that followed were a trial of a different kind, a trial of normalcy. Dante, the man who had commanded empires, found himself learning the mundane rhythms of a life without guards. He learned how to cook simple meals, his large, scarred hands looking out of place as they chopped vegetables in the small kitchen. He learned how to sleep without a gun under his pillow, though the nightmares still came, wrenching him awake in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat and gasping Isabella's name, or Lyra's. Lyra, too, was grappling with her own identity. Without the need to hide, without the thrill of the nocturne hunt, she felt unmoored. She would open her laptop, stare at the blank document, and realize that the dark symphonies she had once composed no longer had a place in her heart. She was no longer writing to survive. She was living, and she didn't know how to translate that into prose. "You're not writing," Dante noted one afternoon as he found her staring at the lake. "I don't know who the protagonist is anymore," she admitted. "The girl in the stories was brave because she had nothing to lose. I have everything to lose now, Dante. I'm carrying your child, and I'm in a house with a man who could still be killed by a dozen different enemies. I'm terrified." Dante walked over, kneeling in front of her. He placed his hand on her stomach, the small, nearly invisible curve that held their future. "They won't come here, Lyra. I've burned every trail. To the world, Dante Valesco died in that nightclub with his mother. I am a phantom. You are a phantom. And this child, She will be the only real thing we've ever made. You think it's a girl? Lyra asked, a faint, genuine smile touching her lips. I hope so, Dante said, his voice softening with a tenderness that still felt alien to him. The world has enough Valesco men. It needs someone with your eyes to see the beauty in the ruins. But the past is never truly buried. A month into their seclusion, a black car appeared at the end of the long, winding driveway. Dante was on his feet before the engine had even cut out, his hand instinctively reaching for the weapon he no longer carried. "Stay inside," he barked, his voice reverting to the sharp authority of the Milanese lord. Lyra watched through the window as a familiar figure stepped out of the car. It was Enzo. The old butler looked older, his face etched with the exhaustion of the last few weeks, but his eyes were clear. He carried a small, leather-bound briefcase. Dante met him halfway down the path. They spoke in low tones for a long time, the wind carrying fragments of their conversation. The final audit, the London accounts, he's been found. Dante returned to the house an hour later, his expression grim. He set the briefcase on the kitchen table. "What is it?" Lyra asked. "Enzo has been tying up the final loose ends in London," Dante said. "Arthur Thorne, your stepfather." Lyra's blood ran cold. "I thought your men. I thought it was handled." "It was," Dante said, his gaze fixed on her. "But before he died, he gave Enzo a name. The person who really told him where to find you in Milan. It wasn't my mother, Lyra, and it wasn't Lorenzo Romano." He opened the briefcase and pulled out a single, grainy photograph. It was an image of a man in a London pub, handing a thick envelope to Arthur Thorne. Lyra leaned in, her breath hitching as she recognized the face. It was Mark Wilson, her editor, the man who had first published Nocturne. "Mark?" Lyra whispered, her world tilting. "Why? He was the one who gave me my voice. He was the one who made me famous." "He was the one who realized that a dead author is worth more than a living one," Dante said, his voice dropping to a deathly whisper. "He knew you were in Milan. He knew the Romanos were looking for a way to hurt me. He sold your location to Lorenzo Romano to create the ultimate ending for your book. He wanted a true crime masterpiece, Lyra. He wanted to publish your final, posthumous chapter." The betrayal hit Lyra harder than any of Maria's machinations. Mark had been the only person she trusted in her professional life. He had been the one who encouraged her to dig deeper into the Mafia's darkness, never realizing he was the one digging her grave. "Where is he?" she asked, her voice trembling with a cold, sharp rage. "In a cell beneath a warehouse in London," Dante said. "Enzo's men have him. He's waiting for a verdict." Dante looked at her, the grey in his eyes turning to the colour of wetted steel. "I promised you that I wouldn't be the monster anymore. I promised you we would leave the blood behind. But he tried to turn your life into a commodity, Lyra. He tried to have you murdered for a bestseller. Tell me what you want and I will make it happen. Exile, or the ending he wanted for you." Lyra looked at the photograph of Mark, the man who had exploited her trauma for profit. She thought of the night in the Romano warehouse, the knife at her throat, the smell of her own fear. She thought of Dante's mother, dead on the floor of the Inferno. The author in her wanted to write a scene of spectacular vengeance. She wanted to see Mark feel the terror he had inflicted upon her. But as she looked at Dante, the man who was trying so hard to find his soul, she realized that the only way to win was to refuse to play the game. "Don't kill him, Dante," she said, her voice clear and final. Dante's brow furrowed. "Lyra, he sold you to a butcher." "I know, and if you kill him, you're proving that the Valesco name is still alive. You're proving that we're still in the dark." She walked over and closed the briefcase. "Give the evidence to the feds. Let him be exposed as a conspirator to kidnapping and murder. Let his masterpiece be the trial that ruins him. I want him to watch from a prison cell as I publish the real story, my story, under my real name. Dante looked at her for a long time, the tension in his shoulders slowly dissipating. He let out a long, ragged breath and pulled her into his arms, burying his face in the crook of her neck. "You're better than I am, Lyra. I don't know how you can be so soft in a world this sharp." "It's not soft, Dante," she whispered into his chest. "It's the only way to be free." That night, Lyra opened her laptop again. The screen glowed in the darkness of the Lake Como villa. She didn't look at the old Nocturne files. She created a new document. There is a silence that follows a war. It is not the silence of peace, but the silence of exhaustion. I used to think that the ending was the most important part of a story. I used to think that justice had to be loud. But as I sit here watching the man I love sleep in the moonlight, I realize that the best stories are the ones that don't have an ending at all. They just have a series of new beginnings. She began to type the truth, not as a weapon, but as an exorcism. She wrote about the girl in the rain, the devil in the bespoke suit, and the mother who loved a ledger more than a son. She wrote about the blood on the marble and the jasmine in the air. Dante stirred in his sleep, his hand reaching out across the sheets until it found hers. He didn't wake up, but his fingers curled around her wrist, a gentle, protective anchor. Lyra smiled, her fingers continuing to dance across the keys. "The king is dead," she wrote, "and the man is finally awake, and so am I." By the time the sun began to peek over the lake, Lyra had written 10,000 words. Her heart felt lighter than it had in years. She wasn't Nocturne anymore. She wasn't Housekeeper Thorne. She was Lyra. And for the first time, she wasn't running. 8 months had bled into the calm waters of Lake Como, and the world of Dante Valesco was no longer painted in the stark contrasts of blood and shadow. It had become a world of softer hues, the pale blue of the morning mist, the warm gold of the hearth, and the vibrant green of the garden Lyra had insisted on planting. The concrete mausoleum of Milan felt like a nightmare from a previous century, a story written by a woman Lyra no longer recognized. Lyra stood in the center of the nursery, her hand resting on the heavy, rounded swell of her stomach. The child within was restless, a small, rhythmic thumping that reminded her of Dante's heartbeat, strong, insistent, and undeniable. She was 38 weeks pregnant, and the physical weight of the future was a constant presence. The room was bathed in the amber glow of the setting sun, filled with soft fabrics and wooden toys that Dante had meticulously sanded down himself. His large, scarred hands finding a new purpose in the creation of a sanctuary. She looked at the desk in the corner. Her laptop sat there, but next to it was a thick stack of printed galleys. The book was finished. The Architecture of Ash was slated for publication in a month, not as a digital ghost story under the name Nocturne, but as a literary memoir by Lyra Valesco. It was her final exorcism, a public declaration that the truth could not be buried by bullet or bribe. The front door creaked open downstairs. Dante was home. He didn't move like a king anymore. There was no phalanx of guards, no scent of gunpowder clinging to his coat. When he entered the nursery, he looked like a man who had finally learned how to breathe. He wore a simple linen shirt, the sleeves rolled up to reveal tattoos that now seemed like ancient, irrelevant hieroglyphs. "You're standing too much," he said, his voice a low, melodic rumble as he walked toward her. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, his palms resting over hers on the curve of her belly. "She's active today," Lyra whispered, leaning her head back against his shoulder. "I think she's as impatient as her father." Dante pressed a kiss to the crown of her head. If she's anything like her mother, she'll be the one telling the rest of us where to go. They stood in the quiet for a long time, watching the sun dip below the mountains. It was the kind of peace that Lyra had once thought impossible. A peace that felt so fragile she was almost afraid to speak, lest the sound of her voice shatter the illusion. But the silence was interrupted by the sharp, electronic chirp of a phone. Not their house line, but the secure satellite phone Dante kept in the safe in his study. The warmth in the room evaporated instantly. Dante's posture didn't just stiffen, it weaponized. The man who had been sanding wooden toys vanished, replaced by the ghost of the Valesco patriarch. "Wait here," he said, his voice flat and drained of its recent tenderness. Lyra followed him anyway, her heart thudding with a familiar, sickening dread. She stood in the doorway of the study as Dante opened the safe and answered the phone. He didn't speak for a long time. He just listened, his jaw tightening until the bone looked like it might snap. "When?" Dante asked finally. "And where?" He listened for another minute before ending the call. He didn't turn around. He stayed hunched over the desk, his hands gripping the edge so hard the knuckles were white. "Dante!" Lyra's voice was a thin wire of tension. "What is it? Is it the board? Is it Maria's associates?" Dante turned, and for a moment, Lyra saw the ash-grey eyes of the man who had looked at her as trash in the rain. Arthur Thorne. Lyra felt the air leave the room. "My stepfather. You said he was... You said it was handled." "It was," Dante said, his voice a hollow rasp. "Enzo's men in London had him in a black site. He was supposed to be delivered to the authorities this week, but there was an intercept, a private mercenary group funded by a blind trust." "Who?" "Lorenzo Romano," Dante whispered. "He didn't die in the warehouse massacre, Lyra. He escaped through the sewer lines. He spent the last 8 months in Albania, rebuilding a splinter cell. He didn't just want Thorne. He wanted the leverage. Thorne knows where we are. He knew about this villa because he overheard Enzo's men talking." Lyra slumped into the leather chair, her hands trembling. "He's coming here." "No," Dante said, his voice regaining its lethal edge. "He's already here. They tracked the car that Enzo used to visit us last month. They're at the base of the hill." The peace of Lake Como was gone. The jasmine in the air was replaced by the phantom scent of ozone and blood. Lyra looked at the nursery, at the wooden toys and the soft blankets, and felt a scream rising in her throat. "We have to go," she said. "There's no time to run, Lyra. The mountain road is a bottleneck. If we leave now, they'll trap us in the car. We stay. We fight in the house I built to protect you." Dante moved with a terrifying efficiency. He didn't reach for a handgun this time. He went to a hidden panel in the floor of the study, pulling out a tactical rifle and a vest. He looked at Lyra, his eyes searching hers with a desperate, agonizing love. "I swore I wouldn't be this man again," he said. "I wanted to give you a father, not a soldier." "You're giving us a life, Dante," Lyra said, standing up and taking his hand. "Do what you have to do." He led her to the basement, not a dark, damp cellar but a reinforced bunker built into the bedrock of the mountain. It was stocked with water, medical supplies, and a second secure terminal. "Lock the door from the inside," Dante ordered. "Don't open it for anyone but me. If the house goes quiet for more than an hour, use the terminal to trigger the Nocturne protocol. It will alert the local carabinieri and broadcast our coordinates to every major news outlet in Europe. It will expose us, but it will bring the world to this door." "Dante, please." He kissed her then, a hard, desperate kiss that tasted like a goodbye. "I love you, Lyra Thorne. I loved you when I was a ghost, and I love you now that I'm a man. Remember that." The heavy steel door hissed shut, leaving Lyra in a tomb of silence. She sat on the floor, her back against the cold stone, her hands cradling the life inside her. She closed her eyes and listened. Above her, the mansion began to scream. The first sound was the shattering of the grand windows in the living room. The beautiful, intrusive light, now a pathway for the darkness. Then came the rhythmic, staccato bark of gunfire. It wasn't the chaotic spray of street thugs. It was the disciplined, professional fire of Dante Valesco, defending his soul. Lyra opened her laptop. She didn't trigger the protocol. Not yet. She began to type. It was a reflex, a way to anchor herself in a reality that was dissolving. The light has failed. The jasmine has been choked by the smell of sulfur. My husband is upstairs turning into a demon so that our daughter can be a human. I hear the footsteps of the man who haunted my childhood, walking across the marble of the house I almost called home. I am no longer nocturne. I am a mother. And if they come through this door, they will find that a mother's ink is made of more than just words. A massive explosion rocked the villa. The lights in the bunker flickered and died, leaving Lyra in a suffocating, velvety blackness. The floor vibrated with the impact of falling masonry. "Dante," she whispered into the dark. Suddenly the sound of gunfire stopped. The house went horribly, unnaturally quiet. Lyra checked the time. Only 20 minutes had passed. She waited, her breath hitching in her throat, her ears straining for the sound of a familiar footstep. Instead, she heard a voice. It wasn't Dante's. It was a wet, raspy wheeze echoing through the ventilation duct. "Lyra, I know you're down there, girl. I can smell your fear. It's the same smell as London, isn't it? You thought your prince could save you. But look at him now. He's just a pile of meat in the foyer." Arthur Thorne. Lyra's blood turned to ice. She gripped the laptop, her knuckles white. He was alive. He was in the house. And he thought Dante was dead. "He's not a prince," Lyra said, her voice projecting into the darkness, steady and cold. "He's a Valesco. And you've never met a Valesco in the dark, Arthur." A heavy thud echoed against the steel door. Then another. They were using a battering ram. "Open the door, Lyra. Give me the ledger. Give me the codes and I'll let you live. Lorenzo only wants the money." "Lorenzo is a fool," Lyra yelled back. "He thinks the codes are in a ledger. The codes are in my head, Arthur. And if you kill me, the money dies with me." It was a lie, but it was the only weapon she had left. The pounding stopped. A muffled argument broke out on the other side of the door. Then, a new sound. A scream. It was a high-pitched, gurgling sound, the sound of a man being dismantled by a shadow. Then came the unmistakable crack of a neck being snapped. The steel door hissed open. Lyra scrambled back, her heart in her throat. A figure stepped into the doorway. He was drenched in blood, not his own mostly. His linen shirt was shredded, his face a mask of primal fury. Dante. He was shaking, his breath coming in ragged, animalistic gasps. He didn't say anything. He just looked at her, his eyes searching her face for a sign of injury. "Is he—" Lyra started. "He's gone," Dante said, his voice a ghost of itself. "Thorne, the mercenaries, Lorenzo, they're all in the foyer. They won't be bothering us again." He walked toward her, but stopped 10 feet away. He looked at his hands, blood-stained and trembling. "I'm sorry, Lyra. I'm so sorry you had to hear that. I'm sorry I had to become him again." Lyra stood up, moving toward him with an agonizing slowness. She didn't look at the blood. She looked at the man. She took his hands in hers and pressed them against her cheeks, her tears washing away the red stains. "You didn't become him," she whispered. "He killed for power. You fought for love. There is a difference, Dante. There will always be a difference." Dante collapsed against her, his head resting on her shoulder as he finally let go of the monster. They stayed there in the dark of the bunker, surrounded by the ruins of their peace, while the sirens of the carabinieri began to wail in the distance. The world would find them now. The Valesco leak, the Romano massacre, the phantom life in Como. It would all be on the front pages by dawn. But as the police began to swarm the hillside, Lyra looked at her laptop. She didn't delete the words she had written. She added one final sentence to chapter 12. The war is over. The ghosts are finally buried. And as the morning light breaks over the lake, I realize that we don't need a fortress to be safe. We only need each other and the courage to tell the truth in the dark. The courtroom in Milan was a cathedral of cold marble and indifferent law, a place where the echoes of the Valesco name had once commanded fear and silence. But today, the air felt different. The high ceilings, ornate with the dusty glory of a bygone era, seemed to shrink under the weight of the truth. For Lyra Thorne, now officially recognized by the world as Lyra Valesco, this was the final stage of a performance that had begun in a rain-slicked alleyway nearly 2 years ago. She sat in the witness stand, her posture a defiant line of obsidian elegance. She wore a simple charcoal suit, her only adornment the gold wedding band that felt like a warm, protective anchor on her finger. Beside her, in the front row of the gallery, Dante sat with their daughter, Isabella, nestled against his chest. The child was 3 months old, a miracle of soft skin and bright green eyes that seemed to have inherited Lyra's curiosity and Dante's unwavering focus. Seeing him there, the man who had once been a demon of the underworld, now gently rocking a sleeping infant, was the only testimony Lyra truly needed to give. The prosecution had spent weeks dissecting the Valesco leak. The world had watched in rapt fascination as the intricacies of the Romano collapse, the corruption of the board of directors, and the dark architecture of Maria Valesco's empire were laid bare. Mark Wilson, the editor who had tried to sell Lyra's life for a headline, sat in the defendant's dock, his face a pale mask of ruin. He was no longer the architect of narratives. He was a footnote in a tragedy he couldn't control. "Mrs. Valesco," the judge began, his voice echoing through the silent chamber. "You have provided the digital ledgers, the metadata from the Tuscany accounts, and a comprehensive narrative of the events leading to the confrontation at Lake Como. But the court must ask, why did you choose to expose these secrets knowing it would likely end your life?" Lyra looked at Dante. He gave her a small, imperceptible nod, a silent communication that transcended words. "I didn't expose them to end a life," Lyra said, her voice clear and resonant, reaching every corner of the room. "I exposed them to reclaim one. For too long, the people in this room and the families they represent have treated human lives as variables in an equation of power. They built their kingdoms on silence. I simply chose to be the one who spoke." She looked directly at Mark Wilson, then at the remnants of the Milanese elite. "You called me trash. You called me a spy. You called me a ghostwriter. But the truth is, I was just a mirror. I showed you the rot you were too afraid to see in yourselves. And once you see the truth, you can never truly return to the dark." The verdict, when it came, was a thunderclap that shattered the old world. The Valesco assets were seized, the board was dismantled, and Mark Wilson was sentenced to 20 years for conspiracy and endangerment. But for Lyra and Dante, the victory wasn't found in the judge's gavel. It was found in the quiet moment after the cameras stopped flashing, when they walked out of the courthouse and into the crisp autumn air of Milan. They didn't stay in the city. Milan was a graveyard of memories they no longer needed to haunt. They returned to the villa on Lake Como, which had been restored not as a fortress, but as a home. The bullet holes in the marble had been filled, the broken windows replaced with glass that allowed the light to flood every corner. The bunker in the basement was now a wine cellar, its steel door left permanently ajar. A month after the trial, the first copies of The Architecture of Ash arrived. Lyra sat on the porch, the same place she had once sat in a fugue of trauma, and held the book in her hands. The cover was simple, a splash of crimson silk against a grey background. Her name was embossed in gold. It was a bestseller before it even hit the shelves, a cultural phenomenon that was being hailed as the death knell of the old Mafia. Dante walked out to join her, carrying a tray of tea. He looked at the book, a shadow of a smile playing on his lips. "It's a strange feeling," he mused, sitting beside her, "being a character in a book that everyone is reading." "You're not a character anymore, Dante," Lyra said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "You're the man who mowed the lawn this morning and complained about the drainage in the garden. You're real." Dante laughed, a sound that was no longer rare, no longer forced. He looked out at the lake, where a small boat was bobbing in the distance. "I read the final chapter last night, the one you added after the trial. And you made me sound more heroic than I was. I was a man who fought because he had no other choice." "We always have a choice, Dante. You chose to save me when you could have let the darkness take us both. That's the definition of a hero in my book." He took her hand, his fingers tracing the faint, fading scars on her wrists. "And what about the author? What does she do now that the mystery is solved?" Lyra looked at her laptop, which was sitting on the table, currently displaying a blank screen. "The author is taking a hiatus. I think I've written enough about the dark. I want to see what happens when the sun stays up." That night, they hosted a small dinner, just the two of them, Enzo and the few staff members who had become their chosen family. There was no wine spilled on the floor, no uninvited guests, and no scent of fear. They ate under the stars, the sound of the lake a gentle, rhythmic lullaby. Enzo stood up to give a toast, his eyes misty as he looked at the couple. "I have served the Valesco family for 40 years, he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I saw the rise of the empire and the fall of the gods, but I have never seen a man truly happy until the day he stopped trying to be a king. To Dante, Lyra, and the little Isabella, may your story be long, boring, and filled with nothing but peace." As the night wore on and the guests retreated, Lyra stayed in the nursery, watching Isabella sleep. The child's tiny fingers were curled around the edge of her blanket, her breath soft and rhythmic. Dante appeared in the doorway, his silhouette no longer a looming threat, but a warm presence that filled the room with safety. "She's perfect," he whispered, coming to stand beside Lyra. "She's our beginning," Lyra replied. They walked out onto the balcony together, looking at the moon reflected in the water. The air smelled of jasmine and pine, the scent of a world that was no longer trying to kill them. Lyra felt a sudden, irrepressible urge to write. Not for the world, not for the bestseller lists, and not for vengeance. She walked to her desk and opened the laptop. Dante stood behind her, his hands on her shoulders, watching as she typed the final words of her life's most important work. "I once thought that the dark was a place where stories went to die. I thought that to be a writer was to be an observer of tragedy, a scavenger of pain. But as I stand here in the arms of a man who was once my captor and is now my soul, I realize that the best stories are the ones we live, not the ones we tell." She paused, looking at the cursor blinking in the darkness. "The Valesco name is no longer a curse. It is a promise that even the most shattered mirror can be made whole if it reflects enough light. We are not defined by the blood we carry or the secrets we keep. We are defined by the courage to walk out of the inferno and keep walking until we find the dawn. Lyra hit save and closed the laptop. She turned in Dante's arms, her eyes meeting his ash-grey ones. There was no more ice in them. There was only the reflection of the woman he loved. "Is it finished?" Dante asked. "No." Lyra smiled, pulling him down for a kiss that tasted of freedom and forever. "It's just getting started." 5 years later, the name Nocturne was a relic of the past, a trivia answer for those who followed the literary world. Lyra Valesco had become one of the most respected novelists of her generation, her work focusing on the resilience of the human spirit and the complexity of redemption. She and Dante had moved to a quiet estate in the rolling hills of Tuscany, ironically the very place where Maria Valesco had once plotted her darkness. But they had turned the estate into a foundation, a sanctuary for women and children escaping the very violence that had once defined their lives. Dante was the foundation's director. He was a man of few words, but his presence was a shield for those who had none. He had spent the last 5 years using the remains of the Valesco wealth to dismantle the systemic rot he had once helped maintain. He was no longer the king of Milan. He was the guardian of the hills. Isabella was 5 now, a whirlwind of energy who loved to run through the olive groves and help her mother in the library. She was joined by a younger brother, Leo, who had Dante's jaw and Lyra's laugh. On a warm July evening, the family sat together on the terrace. The sun was setting, casting long, golden shadows across the vines. Lyra was reading a draft of her latest book, while Dante played a game of chess with Isabella, teaching her that the most important moves are the ones that protect the pieces you love. Dante looked up, catching Lyra's eye. He smiled, a full, radiant smile that reached his eyes, and stayed there. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. Lyra looked at her husband, at her children, and at the peaceful world they had built from the ashes of an empire. She thought about the rain in Milan, the red dress, the warehouse, and the look on Dante's face when he had first called her trash. It felt like a lifetime ago. It felt like a story she had read in a book. "I was thinking about the ending," she said. "And?" Lyra stood up, walking over to him and resting her hand on his shoulder. "I was thinking that I was wrong. The ending isn't the most important part of the story." "Then what is?" Lyra looked at the horizon, where the light was finally, truly beginning to stay. "The part where you decide to keep going," she whispered. "The part where you realize that no matter how dark the chapter, you're the one holding the pen."